Hello there, and welcome back to All About Earth, where science drifts slowly, like a tide at dusk. Before we begin, take a breath. Where are you right now? Maybe you're sinking into a soft couch, your favorite blanket pulled close. Maybe you're lying in a warm bed, the hum of the night wrapping around you. Or perhaps, if you're lucky, you're under an open sky, stars blinking like the slow heartbeat of the universe. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're going to travel backward, not just in years, but in textures of time, to an ocean that shimmered before humans ever dreamed. Before whales sang, before even coral had learned to build. Picture it now, deep beneath the waves. Something glides, a creature with wings like fins, a whip-like tail, and a face that seems almost to smile. It's called a ratfish, though that name hardly suits its quiet grace. It belongs to an ancient lineage, a remnant from an age when the seas were ruled by cartilage and teeth, when sharks, yes sharks, were the architects of the deep, but not the sharks you know. Not the sleek grey hunters that circle reefs today. No, these were creatures of imagination and experiment. Some wore saw-blade teeth, serrated like gears. Others had hammer-shaped heads wider than their bodies. Some even looked like living kites, skimming through prehistoric currents with fins like wings. The ocean then was full of prototypes, strange, shimmering blueprints that evolution would later erase, and the ratfish gliding quietly across the seafloor tonight is a ghost of that age, a survivor from a time when the seas were a gallery of ideas, some elegant, some absurd, all alive. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why did nature once sculpt such strange forms? The saw shark's weapon mouth, the anvil-headed beast, the fish that flew, and then let them vanish. What story of survival and loss is written in those vanished fins? That's where we're headed tonight, into the age of the strange sharks. A time of wonder, teeth, and transition. But before we dive, take one more moment to get comfortable. Let your breath find its rhythm, and let the waves of imagination carry you back. And if you enjoy drifting through this calm ocean of science and storytelling, you can gently tap like or share or subscribe, not out of hurry, but to help this small, peaceful current find other curious travelers like you. Now, close your eyes if you wish. The modern world fades, the ocean of deep time begins to rise. Let's begin our journey, back to the time of the strange sharks. 439 million years ago, the world was a different song. The continents were scattered fragments adrift across the face of a shallow, breathing ocean. The air was still thin, holding barely a whisper of oxygen. The seas shimmered with early coral gardens and forests of crinoids that swayed like ghostly flowers in slow motion. This was the Silurian, an age of quiet reconstruction after cataclysm, a pause in Earth's long symphony where life gathered itself, took a breath and began to try again. Just a few million years earlier, the planet had nearly frozen. Glaciers crept over the land, locking the seas in ice. Many lineages vanished in that long chill, leaving the world scarred and quiet. But as the ice withdrew and the oceans warmed, life began to bloom again in the shallows. The reefs returned, small at first, built by coral and sponges that were learning to share space, to weave calcium into architecture. Brachiopods, trilobites, and eurypterids, the sea scorpions, roamed the seabeds, armored and ancient, each carrying the memory of survival written into their shells. And beneath them all, in the dim green water of coastal lagoons and estuaries, something new and uncertain stirred, a lineage that would come to redefine the ocean, but not yet. For now it was small, fragile, almost invisible. Its body lacked the heavy bone plates that protected so many of its neighbors. It moved with a grace borrowed from cartilage, not armor. These were the earliest of the cartilaginous fishes, the ancestors of sharks and rays, still tentative, still finding their way. Their story begins even earlier, in the late Ordovician, around 465 million years ago, when the first hints of their existence appeared as tiny tooth-like scales in the fossil record. Each scale, only a few millimeters wide, told a quiet secret that something flexible and fast was evolving beneath the armored age. But in the Silurian, this idea of cartilage and speed was still a whisper, not yet a roar. The oceans belonged to others. Most dominant of all were the placoderms, the armored fishes. Imagine them, thick plates of bone, encasing their heads and shoulders, jaws lined with bony blades, sharp enough to shear through shell and flesh alike. They were the juggernauts of their time, living fortresses that drifted through Silurian waters with the confidence of new invention. Among them, distant ancestors of the later Dunkleosteus loomed like living tanks, their armored heads glinting in sunlight that filtered through the sea. They were the heavyweights of evolution, creatures built for dominance, not subtlety. For the small cartilaginous fishes, life among such giants was perilous. Their bones were soft, their bodies offered no defense against the snapping jaws of placoderms or the sweeping claws of eurypterids. They lived on the edge, the ecological margins, where danger met possibility. Shallow waters, brackish estuaries, the quiet backwaters of ancient deltas, these were their refuges. There, in the shifting light between land and sea, they found the space to breathe, to move, to experiment. Cartilage, though fragile, had its own advantages. It was lighter than bone, more flexible, quicker to heal. In a world ruled by armor, these tiny pioneers traded protection for speed, defense for agility. They became the darting ghosts of the Silurian shallows, small enough to hide among seaweeds, quick enough to vanish into silt when predators approached. Their movement was a new kind of poetry, soft and flowing, like a thought slipping just out of reach. To the Silurian sea, they must have seemed unremarkable. Nothing about them hinted at the dominance to come. Their skeletons, made of cartilage, rarely fossilized. Most traces of their early bodies were lost, leaving only scales and fragments, the quiet punctuation marks of an unseen story. But evolution often begins this way, not with trumpets or thunder, but with whispers in the mud. Meanwhile, the oceans themselves were changing. The Silurian brought a remarkable recovery of life after the harshness of ice. Coral reefs grew dense and diverse, harboring communities of creatures in dazzling variety. Sea lilies anchored to the seafloor, their arms unfurling to catch drifting food. Nautiloid cephalopods, elegant with spiral shells, glided through the currents. Trilobites continued to patrol the sediments, their compound eyes scanning for movement. The water was alive with motion, predator and prey, hunter and scavenger, each adjusting, refining, enduring. Amid all this complexity, the small cartilaginous fish remained minor players, but they were learning. Their lightweight bodies let them move with unusual silence, conserving energy where others exhausted themselves. Their skin, covered in tiny dermal denticles, scales shaped like teeth, smoothed their passage through the water, reducing drag, a marvel of natural engineering. Though fragile, they were efficient, their designs lean and purposeful. And while the armored fish of the age bore their skeletons on the outside, these early cartilaginous creatures carried their structure within. It was a reversal of logic, a quiet rebellion against the age of armor. Nature was experimenting again, and as usual she was keeping her options open. The Silurian was a world of shallow seas, vast continental shelves spread across the planet, warm and well lit. Life clung to the edges of these waters, not yet ready to venture far into the open ocean. The first true vascular plants had just begun to colonize land, tiny green specks along the coastline, forming the earliest soil. The air tasted faintly of oxygen, but the land was still mostly barren. Yet the link between land and sea was growing stronger. Rivers fed minerals and nutrients into the coastal zones, creating fertile havens for early fish. And it was here, in this mingling of fresh and salt, that the small cartilaginous fish thrived. To imagine them is to picture simplicity laced with potential. No great jaws yet, no rows of gleaming teeth, just small, streamlined bodies, sensory organs, keenly tuned to vibration and chemical change. They could sense the faint pulse of movement nearby, the signature of approaching danger, or perhaps of prey. Their world was one of texture and pulse rather than sight, a world read through the skin. Meanwhile, the placoderms above them ruled like armored kings. They grazed the reefs and hunted each other in brutal displays of strength. Their plates clicked and ground with every motion. In the light filtering down through the green water, they gleamed like living sculptures of bronze. And yet, for all their power, they were heavy, slow to turn, bound by their own armor. Beneath and between them, The cartilaginous fish moved freely, unnoticed, rehearsing a future they could not yet imagine. If the Silurian ocean had a voice, it might have whispered encouragement to these small survivors. Wait, your time will come. Evolution is a patient sculptor. The bones of the giants would one day crumble, their armor reduced to dust. But flexibility, lightness, and speed, these would endure. The world above the waves was shifting too. As plants spread along shorelines, they began to change the chemistry of the atmosphere. The land, once silent, began to hum faintly with the first ecosystems, mosses, small arthropods, perhaps the earliest millipedes exploring damp soil. The earth was preparing itself for new ways of living, and the water echoed the same rhythm. The Silurian was not dramatic in the way later ages would be. It was subtle, a time of groundwork, of quiet invention. Down in the estuaries and tidal flats, the small fishes continued to adapt. The ability to breathe in variable conditions, low oxygen here, high salinity there, gave them resilience. They learned to navigate the blurry boundaries between environments, between salt and fresh, between light and shadow. Their flexibility wasn't only physical, it was ecological. While the armored titans were confined to the open seas, these small creatures learned to live in the margins, and in doing so they gained access to the future. Perhaps they darted among stands of ancient algae, their shadows slipping across the sand. Perhaps they fed on soft-bodied worms or tiny crustaceans, their movements quick and precise, their bodies, unburdened by bone, could twist and turn in ways their armored rivals could not. In their fragile forms, the blueprint of grace was being written, and still, the Silurian sea was not gentle. Storms swept across the shallow shelves, stirring sediments into clouds. Volcanic islands rose and fell. The continents themselves were on the move, converging slowly toward future collisions that would form new mountains. Every shift brought new habitats, new pressures, new opportunities. The small cartilaginous fish persisted through it all, too small to be targets of extinction, too flexible to be cornered. In the grand ledger of life, survival sometimes favors the unnoticed. When we look back now, through the fossil record, we see almost nothing of them. Their bones dissolved, their bodies vanished, their stories hidden in the spaces between rock layers, yet the few scales that remain, those tiny glinting fossils from ancient sediments, are enough to tell us that they were there. Enough to remind us that every age, no matter how dominated by giants, holds its quiet innovators. So imagine it, if you can, the Silurian sunlight filtering through green water, the shimmer of trilobite carapaces drifting across coral gardens, the heavy shapes of placoderms patrolling the depths, and then, near the shore, a flash, quick, delicate, almost invisible, a small fish, its skeleton pliant, its movement effortless. It darts through the reeds, vanishes into shadow, and the sea closes behind it as though it were never there. That fleeting gesture, that small motion of muscle and light, would one day reshape the oceans, but not yet. For now, the age belongs to the armored. The seas are ruled by plates and jaws, by brute strength and grinding hunger. Yet even in that dominion, evolution is dreaming. In the quiet corners of the Silurian world, cartilage is learning to live. And so the ocean keeps its secret, a whisper of motion, a promise of change. The placoderms reign, the reefs bloom, and the small cartilaginous fish glide unseen at the edges of everything, patient, persistent, alive. The Earth, it seems, was already planning ahead. 373 million years ago, the oceans shuddered. For hundreds of millions of years, life had been building itself upward. Corals weaving vast reefs, armored fishes ruling the depths, plants marching slowly onto land. The Devonian world had been a green and golden age, full of promise, full of motion. But beneath the shimmering surface, something had begun to falter. The balance between life and death tilted, oxygen dwindled, seas grew stagnant, and one by one the lords of the ocean began to disappear. It was the late Devonian extinction, an ending that unfolded not as a single cataclysm, but as a long, uneasy fade. Over millions of years, the planet changed its mind about what kinds of creatures it would allow to flourish. The great armored fishes, the placoderms that had once ruled every current, every coral slope, began to vanish. Their vast jaws and heavy bone plates, once symbols of evolutionary success, became burdens in a world that was running out of air and patience. Imagine those ancient seas, reefs stretching for hundreds of miles, built by corals and sponges, alive with color and soundless motion. Then imagine them dying, slowly, then suddenly. Oxygen dropped in the water, warm currents shifted. Volcanic eruptions poured ash and minerals into the sea, altering chemistry. Rivers, now richer with nutrients from expanding plant life on land, delivered floods of decaying matter that choked the shallows. Algae bloomed, consumed oxygen, and left behind stillness. The once clear water turned murky, greenish-brown. The reefs suffocated, collapsed and dissolved into rubble. The Devonian Ocean became a world of ghosts. It was in this great silence that new voices began to rise. The extinction that destroyed nearly all placoderms left behind, not just emptiness but opportunity. Evolution, ever the opportunist, rushed to fill the void. The age of armor had ended. The age of flexibility was about to begin. In the ruins of a dying world, the cartilaginous fishes, the lineage that had lingered in the background since the Silurian, began to thrive. For tens of millions of years they had been small, cautious, confined to the shallows and river deltas, their soft skeletons fragile beside the armored giants. But extinction, harsh though it is, clears the stage. When the placoderms fell, their ecological thrones, predator, scavenger, reef dweller, deep-sea drifter, stood empty. The oceans were hungry again, and the light-bodied fishes of cartilage were ready. It is strange, isn't it, how life's greatest leaps so often begin with collapse. The earth itself seemed to whisper, "Now, shine," and they did. The cartilaginous fishes exploded into form and number, in fossil beds from what is now Montana, in a place called Bear Gulch. Their story is still written, delicate as memory, but clear as bone. The Bear Gulch limestone, a window into the late Mississippian seas that followed the Devonian crisis, preserves them in astonishing detail. Skeletons, yes, but also soft tissues, eyes, fins, even traces of internal organs. It is as if time, for once, decided to be kind, to hold its breath, and let us look back clearly. Those fossils show a diversity, almost shocking for such an early time. Bodies long and slender, built for speed, others compact and flattened, shaped for hiding on the seafloor. Some had fins like wings gliding through the water with a grace unseen before. Others were built for quick bursts, for ambush, for stealth. Their skin, covered in fine dermal denticles, shimmered in the ancient light, scattering reflections like the scales of a living storm. By some estimates, cartilaginous fishes came to represent 60 to 70% of species in certain regions, an extraordinary takeover. The seas, once ruled by bone and armor, now moved to the rhythm of cartilage. What had once been weakness, lightness, softness, flexibility, had become strength. The world itself had changed to favor the quick, the responsive, the ones who could feel and move with the shifting tides. To understand their rise, you have to imagine the chaos of recovery. After the reefs died, entire ecosystems had to rebuild from scratch. Coral skeletons lay broken and buried. New reefs made by different organisms began to grow. The water chemistry had changed, the oxygen still patchy, the food webs fragile. It was a world in flux, unpredictable, unstable, and in such worlds, adaptability is everything. The cartilaginous fishes, unburdened by bone, could evolve fast. Their skeletons, made of cartilage, required less energy to grow. Their bodies could twist and curve in ways their bony relatives could not. They could exploit niches that others ignored, murky shallows, mid-water zones, the thin boundary layers between oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor currents. They could breathe, move, and feed where others suffocated. And they had something else. Sensory mastery. Over millions of years, their lineage had developed electroception, the ability to sense faint electric fields produced by other living things. To live in a dim, oxygen-starved sea, you needed to feel more than you could see. Cartilage, being conductive and flexible, allowed for the perfect integration of such systems. It was as if evolution had been quietly training them all along, preparing them for this exact moment when sight and armor would fail and sensitivity would rule. Meanwhile, the survivors of the plecoderm order dwindled into extinction. Their once mighty jaws fell silent. Their bone plates, which had seemed eternal, eroded away. Their era of dominance had lasted over 50 million years, a blink yet an empire in the deep history of life. And then it was gone. Their extinction was not a punishment, just a turning of the page. The oceans had grown restless. The script of evolution demanded new characters. In this transformed world, the cartilaginous fishes did more than survive. They diversified wildly. Some ventured into deeper waters. Others explored coastlines. A few even moved toward fresh water, tracing the edges of continents. Their reproductive strategies evolved. Their feeding structures refined. They learned to sense vibration, to detect the heartbeats of buried prey. They became artists of movement, dancers of pressure and current. If you were to stand at the edge of a Devonian shore and look out across the sea, you would not yet see the great forms we associate with later ages, but you would feel something stirring beneath the surface. A subtle vibration, a pulse of new life. The armored shapes that once flashed silver and bronze were gone. In their place, shadows moved, sleek and sinuous. The sea was relearning how to move lightly. The Bear Gulch fossils are like photographs of that new choreography. Preserved in exquisite fidelity, they capture creatures in the midst of motion, fins unfurled, tails arched, eyes still open. Each specimen is a frozen instant of a world discovering fluidity. In some, the outlines of muscles and organs are visible, the very architecture of ancient movement. They show how cartilage, so rarely fossilized, could be preserved when the chemistry was just right, the water calm, the sediments fine, the burial swift. And through them, we glimpse the dawning of a new way to be alive in the ocean. These were not yet the masters of the sea, as they would become in later ages, but they were the pioneers of a new order. They embodied the principle that survival is not about strength but responsiveness, about feeling the world and bending with it. When the earth changed its rhythms, they changed with it. When oxygen vanished from one layer, they slipped into another. When light dimmed, they tuned their senses to electricity, to vibration, to the pulse of life itself. It's easy, from the vantage of now, to see inevitability in this story, as if the extinction of the plecoderms had been merely a prelude to the rise of cartilage. But in truth, nothing in evolution is guaranteed. For every lineage that thrives after a collapse, many vanish. The cartilaginous fishes survived not because they were destined to, but because they happened to fit the new world better than the old. The earth did not favor them out of kindness. It simply rewarded their ability to listen. There's something poetic in that the creatures who succeeded after mass death were not the armored, but the sensitive. In a time when power failed, perception triumphed. The ocean, newly quiet, filled again with the soft flicker of flexible bodies gliding through the green twilight of a recovering planet. And yet, even in their flourishing, the memory of the extinction lingered. The reefs were gone, replaced by strange microbial mounds. The coastlines had shifted. Climate swung between warmth and cold. It was an unstable peace, a moment between disasters, but for the cartilaginous fishes, it was enough. In the margins of Earth's history, they found room to grow. The Devonian extinction had reset the board. Life, as always, began to play again. And on that board, the pieces of cartilage began to move in patterns that would echo through time. They learned to hunt with stealth, to sense what others could not, to glide rather than charge. They turned the art of survival into a kind of music, a silent rhythm of muscle and motion. By the end of the Devonian, the seas had changed forever. The armored giants were gone. The reefs were smaller, stranger. The water, though clearer now, still bore the chemical scars of crisis. But in those same waters, light moved differently. The cartilaginous fishes, once tiny, timid survivors of the Silurian margins, had taken their place among the dominant forms of the ocean. The earth itself seemed to recognize the shift. The waves broke over coasts newly alive with motion. The sediments filled again with the prints of fins and scales. The great silence of extinction gave way to the soft rustle of renewal. The planet, always rebuilding, had found its new architects of the deep. If you listen closely, Across 373 million years, you can almost hear it. The sound of cartilage flexing against water, of fins cutting through the quiet, a new lineage awakening to its strength, a whisper rising into a chorus. The age of armor had ended. The age of movement had begun. And in the ruins of extinction, the oceans were reborn, shimmering, restless, alive again with the dreams of cartilage. Somewhere in the warm, shallow seas of the Carboniferous world, about 330 million years ago, shadows moved beneath the rippled sunlight. The water was green and thick with life. Forests of sea lilies swayed in the current, shells littered the sand like pale stars, and shoals of tiny fish flickered in silver clouds. If you looked long enough into those shifting lights, you might have seen a shape glide between them, long, lithe, silent. Not quite a fish, not yet the shark we know, a being from an earlier dream. This was catastrophe, the eel shark. It was not the terror of its age. It did not tower in size or carry the weight of myth. It was small to medium, perhaps 2 meters from snout to tail, yet there was something uncanny in its movement. The body stretched in a sinuous arc, narrow and supple, designed for slipping through crevices where light thinned to green gloom. It moved like a whisper made flesh. A coil, a pause, a flick of the tail, and it vanished again into shadow. The fossil record does not give us the full picture, but it offers clues enough to feel the shape of its life. Catastrophe left behind fragments of fins, spines, and impressions of its unique skeletal structure. Each piece, when cleaned from ancient stone, tells the same story, a creature built for patience and precision. Its dorsal spines, long and ornamented with delicate ridges, stood like silent antennae above its back. They were not for attack, but for defense, a warning shimmer against would-be predators. The rest of its body told a different tale, one of quiet strength, coiled grace, and extraordinary flexibility. The name Cycinocanthus means comb spine, a nod to the fine comb-like ridges that ran along its dorsal spikes. Those ridges, visible even in fossilized form, once caught the light of ancient suns that filtered through the shallows. To imagine them is to see a glimmer of geometry against green water, the ghost of design. The fins attached to those spines were supple and strong, more articulated than in many of its kin. They could shift angle mid-motion, adjusting to eddies, tightening corners in the tight labyrinths of reef and rock. Every movement was calculated, honed by millions of years of silent refinement. Tenecanthus was an ambusher. It did not chase, it waited. Picture the ancient seabed, patches of soft silt, clusters of coral, tangles of seaweed, tiny fish darting between the stems, crustaceans scuttling in miniature storms of sand, and there, between two rocks, a stillness that was not quite still. Its elongated form curled lightly, almost invisible. Only the faint pulse of gills betrayed its presence. Then a flicker, a passing fish, a shimmer of scales, and in an instant, motion. The eel-like body uncoiled with startling speed, the jaws opened, and the prey vanished in a swirl of bubbles. No chase, no struggle, just a flash, and silence again. In this way, Cycinocanthus ruled the narrow places, the tight channels of shallow seas, the tangled roots of underwater vegetation, the dim recesses of reefs. It was a predator of margins, thriving where bulkier creatures could not go. Its spine and muscles formed a ribbon of precision, the blueprint for efficiency before the word existed. The world it inhabited was changing. On land, vast forests of ferns and horsetails reached toward the sun, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. Insects, newly ambitious, took to the air, dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a hawk's. Some of these early flyers returned to the water as larvae, filling the shallows with wriggling life. Beneath the surface, Tenecanthus became their quiet regulator. It kept the populations of small fish and aquatic insects in check, a subtle but essential balance. Every ecosystem needs its keeper of equilibrium, and in those prehistoric shallows this strange eel shark filled that role. Its skin was covered not in smooth scales, but in countless microscopic denticles, tiny teeth that reduced drag as it swam, each one angled precisely to direct water flow along the body, a natural masterpiece of fluid mechanics. When light passed over its surface, it would have shimmered like polished stone, Beneath that shimmering armor, its body was almost boneless, made of cartilage reinforced by fibrous strands. Lightweight, flexible, efficient, a body built for movement, not endurance. The ocean floor was a theater of stillness and sudden violence. To survive, there was to master silence. Catastrophe did not need to outfight its prey. It only needed to outweight them. Its eel-like motion let it drift close without disturbance, its body blending into the rhythm of the current. Even its heartbeat, if we could somehow hear it, must have seemed like part of the water's pulse. Then, in a fraction of a second, the peace would break. The mouth opened, the suction drew, and another small life disappeared into history. Fossils found in limestone deposits show that Secanacanthus was widespread, its remains appearing in regions that were once tropical seas. Some specimens preserve even the traces of fin membranes, suggesting that it had unusual control over its movement, fins that could flare like sails or fold tightly against the body for stealth. In the sediment around those fossils, we find the remains of small crustaceans and early bony fishes, its probable prey. The story of its world is written not just in bones, but in the company they keep. What makes Catastrophe so captivating is not its size or ferocity, but its strangeness. It stands at a crossroads in evolution, part old world, part new. Its skeleton still bore the simplicity of early cartilaginous forms, but its fins, muscles, and sensory systems hinted at future sophistication. In it, we glimpse the tension between past and possibility, the ocean dreaming of what it might yet become. It was, in many ways, a creature of paradox, slender yet armed with spines, fragile yet enduring, primitive in some features, advanced in others. Its design was both ancient and experimental, a bridge between the first flexible fish and the sleek predators that would someday patrol the deep. But Catastrophe was content in the shallows. The deep sea was not its kingdom. It preferred sunlight, the dance of shadow and reflection, the smell of salt-rich water near the coast. There, in the warm currents, it found abundance. Swarms of small fish hatched in the reefs, and insect larvae drifted down from the new forests of land. Catastrophe glided through them like a thought through a dream, a line of movement smooth and unbroken. The world around it was full of beginnings, and it was one of them. Its dorsal spines, striking and ornate, were both warning and identity. Each was a declaration, "This is me, this is mine." When threatened, those spines could have made it a difficult meal for larger hunters, and yet they were also symbols of a time when nature still sculpted extravagance for its own sake. Evolution, still young and exuberant, decorated its creations with flares and ridges and improbable beauty. The spines of Catastrophe are not merely weapons, they are poetry, carved into cartilage. To imagine one swimming is to imagine a ribbon of dusk. It curves through the green light, passes under coral arches, weaves through forests of waving plants. Occasionally it pauses, hovering, the long dorsal spines, marking it like a quill upon the page of the sea. Its eyes are dark, reflective, tuned to the shimmer of scales. When it strikes, it does so with the suddenness of a thought becoming action. There is no hesitation, no waste, only precision. What might it have felt like to be such a creature? To live in a world without sound as we know it, only the pressure of currents, the vibration of heartbeats echoing through water. To move by instinct, guided by subtle shifts in salinity and light. To know hunger not as pain but as purpose. Perhaps there was something almost serene in its existence, a balance between stillness and motion, between concealment and revelation. Scientists who study its fossils often marvel at the preservation of detail. The Bear Gulch limestone of Montana, where many Catastrophe remains have been found, holds them like pressed flowers, every fin ray, every ridge of the spines etched in stone. Through them, we can reconstruct not just the shape, but the behavior, the curvature of the tail, the angle of the fins, all speak of a creature made for precision. The rock remembers the choreography of a vanished world. And though the species eventually vanished, leaving no direct descendants we can name, its spirit lingers in the design of later life. The principles it embodied, flexibility, stealth, economy of motion, would echo across time. Nature rarely forgets a good idea. The eel shape, the patient ambush, the mastery of the narrow space. These strategies reappeared again and again, as if the memory of Cycnocanthus were coded into the ocean's imagination. When we hold its fossil today, we hold more than a skeleton. We hold a story of adaptation, of quiet excellence. In an era dominated by grander creatures, it found a niche no one else could fill. It needed no vast jaws or armored plates. Its weapon was subtlety, its gift survival. There is a certain humility in that story, and a certain wisdom. Evolution, like time, does not always reward the loudest or the largest. Sometimes it favors those who move gently, who listen, who wait. Catastrophe was one of those listeners, a creature attuned to every tremor in the water, every whisper of movement in the silt. The earth itself seemed to encourage such grace. The Carboniferous seas were rich but unstable, warm one epoch, cooler the next, their chemistry shifting with the tides of volcanic and biological change. To live there required flexibility of both body and mind, if such a word can be given to instinct. Catastrophe met that challenge, not with resistance but with adaptation. It did not fight the current, it became part of it. And so it endured. For millions of years this eel shark slipped through the ancient reefs, a ribbon of cartilage tracing the language of water. It hunted, it hid, it reproduced, it vanished. And yet, in that vanishing, it wrote a line in the story of life that would never be erased. Every shark that would one day swim owes something to its quiet invention. If you listen closely, across the gulf of 300 million years, perhaps you can still hear it, the faint secret rustle of motion through silt, the whisper of a fin brushing coral. Catastrophe, the eel shark of the shallows, still glides in the imagination, eternal in its elegance. The sea remembers. It always does. The world was different then, darker, denser, quieter. The Permian seas, almost 280 million years ago, were a patchwork of life and death, beauty and danger. Coral reefs had withered in many places, replaced by new kinds of communities, sponges, brachiopods, and shell-dwelling creatures that carpeted the seafloor like scattered jewels. The oceans were changing, their chemistry shifting toward extremes of salt and temperature, but life, as always, adapted. And gliding across those ancient seabeds came a creature that had turned adaptation into art. Janassa, the shell crusher, the ancient ray. It was not large. Perhaps a meter or so from tip to tail, with a body as flat as the shadow of a cloud. But what it lacked in size it made up for in design. Its form was wide and winged, its skeleton made of cartilage instead of bone, light and strong at once. The pectoral fins stretched out like sails, merging seamlessly into the body, giving it the appearance of a living kite. With each motion it rippled through the water, stirring barely a whisper. From above, it vanished into the shimmer of sunlight. From below it was a fleeting blur against the sandy bottom. The fossils of Janassa tell the rest of its story, found in the black shales of Germany and Russia, preserved as dark silhouettes in stone. They reveal a creature perfectly suited for a life spent close to the seafloor. Its mouth, broad and set on the underside, was paved with crushing plates, not sharp teeth for tearing flesh, but blunt mosaics designed for grinding. It fed not on fish or flesh, but on armor, shells, carapaces, and hard-bodied prey. The crabs and mollusks of its age were its banquet. Imagine it gliding low across the seabed, the edges of its fins brushing the sand. The ocean floor was alive with motion, trilobites still clinging to their fading lineage, brachiopods opening and closing like breathing stones, bivalves shifting slightly in their burrows. Janassa hovered above them, silent and patient. Its eyes set high on the head, watched for movement, shadows, a ripple that betrayed life below. Then, a subtle flick of its fins. It descended, settled, and with a sudden contraction of its body, it pressed its wide mouth against the sediment. There was a muffled crack, a brief tremor, and then calm. Another shell crushed, another meal consumed. The sea forgot, as it always does. The power of Janassa lay not in its speed but in its patience. It did not chase prey through open water. It waited, listened, and pressed itself close to the earth until the moment was right. The grinding plates inside its mouth, flattened, tessellated, and endlessly replaced, formed one of the earliest known examples of true durophagy, a specialized feeding strategy of crushing hard shells. Each plate bore the record of countless meals, polished by sand, worn smooth by effort, renewed as needed. Evolution had shaped it into a living millstone. Its body was not only flat but flexible, capable of subtle undulations that let it maneuver through tight spaces and sudden shifts in current. Its skin, like that of other early cartilaginous fish, was armored with minute denticles, microscopic teeth that lined the surface in perfect order. Each one was an engineering marvel, directing the flow of water, reducing drag, silencing motion. To the creatures below, Janassa was the ghost of pressure and shadow, invisible until it was too late. The seafloor of the Permian was a kingdom of textures: rippled sand, coral rubble, shells of once living things. It was a place of color muted by depth. Reds turned to bronze, blues to green, whites to the gray of silt. The light that reached it came through a long journey, filtered by waves and time, and through that half-light, Janassa moved like thought itself, drifting, pausing, gliding, the world's first true ray-tracing patterns in the dust of the deep. The world around it was restless. Continents were colliding, forming the great supercontinent Pangaea. Ocean basins were closing, currents changing, volcanic islands flared and died. The chemistry of seawater fluctuated as tectonic forces shifted the balance between land and ocean. Many species struggled to keep pace, but Janassa, living in the shallow margins, adapted effortlessly. Where others needed speed or armor, it relied on elegance and subtlety. It could move from estuary to coastal shelf, from brackish lagoon to open shallows. It was the quiet traveler of its age, equally at home in calm bays and wave-worn reefs. And always there was the sound, or rather the absence of it, the stillness of sediment stirred only by its wings, the click of shells breaking, soft and rhythmic, like the pulse of the tide. Its role in the ecosystem was not violent, but vital. By feeding on the shell-bearing invertebrates that crowded the seabed, Janassa helped keep those populations in check, maintaining balance in a world prone to excess. Too many burrowers and the sediment would choke the corals and sponges. Too few, and the seabed would harden into barren crust. Predators like Janassa made sure the rhythm continued, the quiet choreography of life and decay that sustains the ocean's breath. Even its name feels slow and deliberate, like the glide of its motion, Janassa. The syllables stretch, smooth and fade. The fossils of this ancient ray are rare but evocative, often showing the outline of its entire body flattened into stone, a dark stain that still seems to move if you stare long enough. The delicate structure of the fins, the gentle taper of the tail, the faint texture of denticles, all preserved as if time itself had decided to keep one ripple of motion forever. Its eyes, fossilized as faint impressions, face upward, a gaze toward the surface, toward the distant shimmer of light. Perhaps it watched the shadows of larger predators passing overhead. Perhaps it learned to freeze when danger approached, its flat body merging with the seafloor like a patch of sand. Camouflage was survival, and Janassa wore it perfectly. If you could dive into that ancient sea and follow it, you would see grace more than menace. The way its fins undulated was almost hypnotic, each movement sending waves of pressure across the water. It glided close enough to stir up trails of dust, then vanished again into clear space. Around it, shoals of smaller fish moved nervously, sensing something they could not see. The ocean floor shimmered with life, yet most of it would end beneath the crushing plates of that ancient mouth. There was a quiet intelligence in its method, not thought as we know it, but instinct sharpened to perfection. To survive for millions of years, a creature must do more than exist. It must fit its world so precisely that the two become inseparable. Janassa and the seafloor were one. It read the currents, the light, the vibrations of buried prey. Every grain of sand was information, every ripple a clue. Its descendants would one day evolve into modern rays and skates, inheriting that same flattened grace, that same mastery of silence and sand. But Janassa was the prototype, the first to turn the ocean floor into a hunting ground of finesse. Its design worked so well that nature never truly abandoned it. Across hundreds of millions of years, the same form would reappear, refined but recognizable, the diamond of the sea, gliding low, wings spread, jaws beneath. When paleontologists study its fossils, they often find the crushing plates separate from the body, heavy mosaics of mineralized cartilage that resisted decay. Some look like cobblestones, smooth and interlocking, others like honeycomb patterns pressed into stone. These were the engines of its survival, the instruments of its quiet dominance. Through them, we can almost hear the sound of pressure meeting resistance, a shell cracking open, the final act of patience rewarded. The Permian Sea that Janassa called home would not last. At its end came one of the greatest mass extinctions in Earth's history. Volcanic eruptions poisoned the air and water. Oceans grew anoxic, and entire ecosystems collapsed. The reefs died again, the shallows emptied, and even the mighty lineages of the time disappeared into silence. Yet for a long while before that final catastrophe, Janassa flourished. Its body was the perfect response to the world it knew, its way of life as ancient and steady as the tides. To think of it now is to imagine a world that feels both alien and familiar, an ocean without whales or coral reefs, as we know them, but still vibrant, still full of rhythm. The rays of sunlight through shallow water, the shimmer of sand stirred by fin and tide, these things have not changed. The language of motion that Janassa spoke is still spoken today by every ray that glides along the seabed. There is a peculiar humility in its story. It was not a creature of grandeur or violence, not the apex predator of its age. It was small, quiet, and exquisitely specialized. And yet that specialization, the mastery of the overlooked world beneath the waves, gave it endurance. When larger hunters vanished, when climates shifted, when continents moved, Janassa persisted. Its fossils, when lifted from ancient rock, still carry the memory of that persistence. You can almost trace the line of its winged fins with your finger, feel the slight roughness where the denticles once lay, sense the weight of the crushing plates that turned shells into dust. It is as though the stone itself remembers the motion, remembers the soft sway, the press of body to sand, the pulse of an ancient tide. And maybe, in some quiet way, the earth does remember. Each creature that finds the perfect balance between its form and its world leaves behind a kind of echo, a pattern the planet keeps repeating. The flattened body, the downward gaze, the patience of the ambush, all these things are Janassa's gift to the ocean. Imagine it one last time, the ancient sea stretching beneath a crimson sunset, the water thick with life. The seabed glows faintly with movement. And then, from the dimness, a shape rises, smooth, silent, eternal. It glides across the sand, wings unfurling, eyes glinting in the fading light. A small crustacean shifts, unaware, a ripple, a pause, a crack, and the sea is still again. Janassa fades back into the dark, leaving only a few swirls of silt in its wake. The surface above shimmers and forgets. But in that moment, the rhythm of survival, the patient, unhurried heartbeat of the ocean, continues, just as it has for hundreds of millions of years. The earth whispers its approval, as it always does to those who endure through grace rather than strength. And beneath the waves, the ancient ray keeps gliding, forever crushing shells in the silence of time. There are creatures that the earth invents once and never again. They appear, flourish, bewilder the future, and then vanish, leaving behind mysteries so improbable that even stone seems uncertain how to hold them. Helicoprion was one of those creatures, a spiral of teeth from the deep past, a design so strange that for more than a century, humanity struggled to imagine how it could have lived. 270 million years ago, the seas were restless. The Permian period had begun, and the world was slowly assembling into a single vast supercontinent, Pangaea. The oceans around it were rich, but unstable. Currents shifted with continental drift. Climates swelled with heat. Coral reefs had evolved and collapsed more than once. In that restless blue where everything was changing, swam a lineage of cartilaginous fish, distant cousins of early sharks, that had learned to turn their teeth into architecture. Among them rose Helicoprion, the saw-toothed wonder of the ancient sea. Its name means spiral saw, and even now that name feels more like a spell than a label. For what other creature in history carried its teeth not in rows, but in a curling spiral, coiled like a shell inside its lower jaw? Fossils of this jaw hall, the tooth hall, as paleontologists call it, resemble a circular saw blade frozen in stone, a perfect helix of serrated blades. For decades, no one knew where to place it. Some early scientists thought it might have been a tail weapon, others a dorsal fin ornament. Some imagined a throat lined with whirling blades. But eventually, with careful study and the discovery of preserved jaws, the truth emerged. The spiral belonged inside the mouth, part of the lower jaw coiling backward into the throat like a scroll of teeth. And what a sight it must have been. Imagine the mouth of Helicoprion, wide and smooth, the upper jaw lined with small cutting teeth, the lower jaw dominated by a gleaming spiral of blades, each one sharp as obsidian, each newer tooth pushing the older ones into the center of the coil. When the creature bit, the spiral rotated slightly, pulling prey inward and slicing as it went, a living saw that fed on the flesh and shell of the Permian Sea. It was not merely a predator, it was an invention, an evolutionary experiment in mechanics. The rest of the body we know less about, but fossils and reconstructions give us clues. Helicoprion was long and sleek, perhaps up to 6 or 7 meters in length. Its skeleton, like other cartilaginous fish, was light and flexible. It moved with a grace that belied its size, tail sweeping side to side in smooth rhythmic waves. Its skin was likely covered with tiny denticles, giving it a texture like fine sandpaper, reducing drag as it glided through the currents. Its eyes were large, adapted for dim light, the mark of a hunter that stalked deeper waters. If you were to dive into those ancient oceans and see one approach, you might not notice the spiral at first. You would see the shadow first, long, narrow, almost elegant. But then it would turn, and light would catch the curve of that saw-like jaw, glinting like a silver coil beneath the water. There was nothing else like it. There has never been anything like it since. What did Helicoprion eat? Its jaw offers the clues. The spiral teeth were not built for crushing, but for slicing. Thin, sharp, arranged to shear rather than break. It likely preyed on soft-bodied animals, squid-like cephalopods, early ammonites, and perhaps small fish. When it struck, the lower jaw snapped upward, the spiral rolling prey inward, cutting and drawing it toward the throat in one smooth motion. It was a feeding strategy both beautiful and efficient, a perfect marriage of motion and purpose. Some scientists have described it as a kind of evolutionary gamble, an experiment in biomechanics that nature tried, perfected for a time, and then abandoned. But that description feels too cold for a creature so strange and so beautiful. There is an artistry to Helicoprion's design, a balance between geometry and hunger. It was evolution sculpting with curves instead of edges, crafting a weapon that looked more like a seashell than a blade. Its fossils are most famously found in the Ural Mountains, in Idaho, and in Western Australia. In these rocks, the tooth whorls appear as spirals of white enamel against dark shale, perfectly preserved, still sharp after hundreds of millions of years. Some are small, the size of a coin, others are great discs, the width of a dinner plate, each one a frozen vortex of motion. To hold one is to hold a fragment of an impossible design, a riddle written in bone and time. And yet, for all its strangeness, Helicoprion was not a monster. It was part of a world still full of experimentation. The Permian Ocean was alive with diversity, coiled ammonites drifting like ornaments, armored fish grazing the seafloor, rays gliding through reefs. In that vibrant ecosystem, Helicoprion found its niche, a mid to upper level predator, hunting in open water where light began to fade. It was built for motion, not mass. Its spiral of teeth was not about brute strength but precision, a surgeon's blade in a world of hammers. The spiral itself was a marvel of efficiency. Unlike modern sharks which shed and replaced teeth constantly, Helicoprion retained every tooth it ever grew. As new teeth formed at the outer edge of the jaw, older ones were pushed inward, curling into the spiral like pages in a book. In this way, the creature kept a record of its entire life within its mouth, each tooth a chapter, each turn of the coil a measure of time. The innermost teeth, now fossilized, are the first it ever used, the outermost, the last. A helicoprion fossil is not just anatomy, it is autobiography. Scientists studying the structure of the spiral have found remarkable details. The outermost teeth, freshly formed, are keen and narrow, perfect for slicing. Toward the center of the spiral, where older teeth are packed tight, the edges are smoother, their tips blunted by use. Some fossils even show wear patterns where prey struck again and again. It is, in its own way, a time-lapse sculpture, millions of years of evolution and individual survival, recorded in enamel and cartilage. But what would it have been like to witness one hunt? Perhaps it swam silently through dim blue water, its long body tracing the slope of the continental shelf. Ahead, a school of squid drifted near the surface, their bodies pulsing in rhythm. With a single flex of its tail, helicoprion closed the distance. Its jaws opened, not wide, but swiftly, the spiral catching light like a blade unsheathing. It struck upward, slicing through soft flesh, rolling prey into its coil. The sea clouded briefly with ink and blood, then cleared. The predator glided on, jaw resetting, ready again. The power of its bite did not come from strength alone, but from geometry. The spiral design ensured that the cutting motion was continuous, that no part of the prey escaped the motion of the teeth. It was a perfect machine of motion, a biological rotary saw long before humanity ever dreamed of metal or wheel. And yet helicoprion was more than its teeth. Its success, surviving nearly 20 million years through turbulent seas and changing climates, came from adaptability. It likely swam in a variety of environments, from shallow coastal waters to deeper continental shelves. Its cartilaginous skeleton made it light, fast, and efficient. Its fins, though not preserved in detail, were almost certainly large and triangular, stabilizing its long body as it moved. Its senses were acute, tuned to vibrations, to the faintest flicker of motion in the dark. But even such mastery could not last forever. As the Permian period neared its end, the Earth began to unravel. Volcanic eruptions darkened skies, oceans lost oxygen, temperatures swung violently, entire ecosystems collapsed. The great reefs died, and with them much of the marine life they sheltered. Helicoprion, like so many creatures of that time, vanished into extinction. Its spiral teeth became relics, buried in silt, waiting for human hands to rediscover them eons later. When those first fossils were found in the 19th century, they confounded every imagination. Scientists debated for decades where the spirals belonged, on the jaw, the tail, the body, even as part of a defensive spine. Some early illustrations depicted helicoprion as a fish with a buzzsaw sticking absurdly from its snout. Only later, through careful study of jaw fossils preserved with the spirals still in place, did the truth become clear. It was a creature both elegant and terrifying, its saw hidden inside, not outside, its mouth, a secret weapon rather than a display. There is something deeply poetic in that revelation. The most extraordinary part of helicoprion was never meant to be seen. It lived and hunted with quiet efficiency, its spiral teeth turning only when it fed, unseen by the world above. Its beauty was not for spectacle, but survival. In that it resembles much of nature's best work, hidden, precise, ephemeral. And yet, when we uncover its fossils today, we feel a kind of awe that borders on reverence. That spiral, perfect, mathematical, eternal, reminds us that evolution is not merely functional but imaginative. It does not create by logic alone. It dreams. The helicoprion was one of those dreams made real, improbable, impossible, and yet for millions of years, perfectly alive. If you hold a fossil of its tooth whirl in your hand, turn it slowly under light. The curve catches and releases brightness with each motion, like a frozen wave. Each serration reflects an instant in which life triumphed. One cut, one meal, one heartbeat in an ocean long vanished. The spiral feels almost alive, as if some part of its motion is still continuing in the slow turning of the earth itself. The sea forgets quickly, but stone remembers. And so in these spirals of enamel, the memory of helicoprion endures, the memory of a time when evolution dared to write in circles, when the geometry of survival became art. Perhaps, if the ocean still dreams, it dreams of them still, the long shadows gliding through the deep, the shimmer of a spiral jaw in the blue darkness, the whisper of a saw made of teeth. The Permian is long gone, the seas have changed beyond recognition, but somewhere, in the silence of the fossil beds, the spiral waits, as if it still believes the tide will return. And maybe in some quiet way it already has. For in every pattern of growth, every spiral shell, every curl of fern and galaxy, the shape of Helicoprion lives on, a reminder that nature, even in its strangest experiments, never truly forgets beauty. In the hush of the Devonian twilight, the ocean dreamed of new shapes. Light fell through water like drifting gold, dappling reefs that stretched across shallow seas. The world was young in its imagination. Creatures wore armor, fins, frills and fangs in 1,000 experiments of form. But among them all one stood apart, a small, strange shark with a head like an altar, a body like a whisper, and a mystery that would haunt paleontology for over 300 million years. This was Stethecanthus, the anvil-headed shark. It was not large, perhaps only a meter or two in length, yet every inch of it seemed sculpted for wonder. Its sleek body shimmered with light-catching denticles, its long tail rippled with the rhythm of a practiced swimmer, and above its head rose one of the strangest structures in the history of life, a flat, anvil-shaped crest, like a miniature platform, bristling with tiny spines, a fin that wasn't quite a fin, more a statement, a declaration of evolutionary creativity. To see Stethecanthus alive would have been to witness something both familiar and alien. Its silhouette, at first, resembled that of a small shark, pointed snout, triangular fins, powerful tail, but as it turned in the light, the strange anvil atop its head became unmistakable. It looked as if someone had pressed a smooth stone into the top of its skull and balanced a short, wide fin upon it. The surface of that fin was covered in minute, tooth-like structures, rough, sharp, and reflective. Its shape caught the current, the light, and perhaps the attention of other sharks. For years, scientists puzzled over its purpose. Some believed it was a weapon, a living hammer, used to fend off rivals or predators. Others thought it was a display, a signal to attract mates or warn competitors. A few even imagined it might serve as a sensory organ, helping the shark detect vibrations in the water. But the truth, as often happens in nature, is likely a blend of function and poetry, a design born not of logic alone, but of beauty, survival, and chance. The name Stethecanthus means chest spine, drawn from the peculiar fin that sat between its shoulders, the same strange anvil that extended over the head. Fossils show that the crest was adorned with a dense carpet of denticles, each one angled backward like the teeth of a saw. These denticles formed a rough, brush-like surface, giving the fin a texture unlike any other creature. In life it might have gleamed when light hit it, flashing like scales of polished metal. To imagine the world it swam in, we must descend into the late Devonian and early Carboniferous seas, warm, fertile, and teeming with life. Coral reefs spread across the continental shelves. Armored fish, though fewer than before, still drifted through the shallows. Crinoids and brachiopods clung to rocks, their feathery arms filtering food from the water. The sea was alive with color and movement, every current a highway of forms, and in that richness Stethecanthus found its home. It preferred the nearshore waters, places where sunlight played on the seabed, where small prey gathered, and where predators lurked in the dim edges of the reef. Its mouth, lined with small sharp teeth, was perfect for catching fish, crustaceans, and soft-bodied invertebrates. But hunting was not its only purpose. The peculiar shape of its head and fin suggests a life of ritual, a creature that lived by gestures as much as by hunger. Some paleontologists have speculated that the anvil fin was used in mating displays, a signal of maturity and dominance. Perhaps the male Stethecanthus would position itself before a rival, arch its back and raise that strange crest high, letting light ripple across the bristling surface. The sharp denticles might have reflected flashes of sunlight, dazzling or intimidating its peers. Maybe, like a peacock's tail or a bird's song, it was a display of vitality, proof of health, of lineage, of belonging. Others suggest it served as protection, a deterrent against larger predators. When threatened, Stephacanthus could lower its head, presenting the anvil like a shield of rough blades. The small spines covering it would have made it difficult, even painful, to bite. A mouth full of tiny teeth and a head crowned with sharp ridges. It was not a creature to swallow easily. There is elegance in the way such ideas coexist, the same structure serving beauty and defense, attraction and survival. Evolution rarely wastes effort. The anvil was likely both a weapon and a symbol, a fusion of function and art. The fossil record preserves Stephacanthus in remarkable detail. Skeletons found in the Bear Gulch limestone of Montana and other Carboniferous sites reveal not only the outlines of the body, but also traces of cartilage and muscle. These fossils show a creature with extraordinary balance, its long pectoral fins curving gently, its tail built for steady propulsion rather than bursts of speed. It was not a sprinter, but a dancer. Its movements were measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. If we could follow it through those ancient waters, we might see it gliding low across the seabed, weaving between coral branches and sponges. Occasionally it would tilt its head, catching the light on that peculiar crest, sending a flicker of brilliance across the dim sea. Perhaps smaller creatures fled from the flash, mistaking it for the glint of a predator's eye, or perhaps others of its kind saw the signal and responded, a communication in reflection and motion, long lost to us. In its quiet way, Stephacanthus was a pioneer. Its anvil crest and unique spine structure make it one of the earliest examples of sexual dimorphism among ancient fish, a sign that even in these primeval oceans, courtship had already begun to shape form. The ocean, it seems, was not just a place of survival, but of spectacle. Life was learning not only how to live, but how to be seen. The texture of the anvil fin remains one of its most fascinating features. Under magnification, the denticles resemble tiny teeth, each with its own ridges and grooves, arranged in a pattern so regular it might have been carved. In life, these would have made the fin rough to the touch, like sandpaper or the bark of coral. If light touched it just right, it might have shimmered, a living mirror of texture and gleam. The ocean, always a lover of reflection, would have admired its own image upon that surface. The rest of the body was equally refined, its skin covered in fine denticles, reduced friction as it swam. Its fins, narrow and elongated, allowed it to maneuver through tight spaces, weaving between rocks, gliding through coral thickets. It was likely an ambush predator, relying on stealth rather than speed. A shadow among shadows, waiting for a flash of movement to betray its prey. When the moment came, it would lunge with a swift flex of its tail, jaws snapping shut with precision. The strike was brief, clean, and efficient. But the world of Stephacanthus was not a gentle one. Predators larger than it prowled the deeper waters, and the environment itself was changing. Sea levels rose and fell, continents shifted, and oxygen levels fluctuated. The reefs that once flourished began to collapse, replaced by new ecosystems. Yet Stephacanthus endured, adapting to new shallows, new prey, new rhythms of the sea. When it finally vanished, sometime near the end of the Carboniferous, it left behind not an empire, but a signature, a mark in the story of life that would echo across ages. Later sharks and rays would evolve sleek bodies, powerful jaws, and refined sensory systems, but none would bear the strange elegance of that anvil crest. Stephacanthus was an evolutionary poem written once and never repeated. The fossils of this ancient shark still carry its mystery. In museums, under glass you can see them, the faint outlines of the body, the perfect imprint of the anvil fin, the rows of delicate denticles preserved like frost on stone. People stop, lean close, and stare, trying to imagine the living creature behind the fossil. What did it look like when it swam? What color was it? Did it shimmer silver or glimmer in blues and greens like modern sharks? We cannot know, but somehow the stone whispers enough. Even now, in the silence of those fossils, the shape speaks. It tells of invention, of courage, of a time when life was still experimenting with the physics of beauty. The head of Stephacanthus looks absurd to us, too strange, too improbable, yet in its world it worked perfectly. Nature has always dared to be strange, and in strangeness she finds her greatest triumphs. To imagine it alive is to glimpse the imagination of the earth itself. Picture it, a small shark gliding through green water, its anvil crest glinting like a tiny shield, its fins stirring the sand. It pauses, lifts its head, and turns as if listening to something ancient and inaudible. The light above flickers, and for a moment the sea is filled with sparks, reflections of its own intricate skin. Then it moves again, vanishing into shadow, leaving only the shimmer behind. Perhaps in its own way, Stethecanthus was a mirror. The ocean saw itself in its crest, the rippled surface, the restless shimmer, the interplay of light and shape. It was as though the sea had grown curious about its reflection and sculpted a creature to carry it. Its life, like all lives, was brief compared to the span of time, but its form endured, imprinted in stone, recorded in silence. Each fossil is a still photograph of movement, a creature caught mid-gesture, mid-swim, mid-display. To hold such a fossil is to feel both the delicacy of its existence and the enormity of its legacy. In the grand story of evolution, Stethecanthus was not a ruler but an artist. It did not dominate the ocean with strength or size, it captured it with elegance. A fleeting shimmer, a sculpted crest, a head shaped like an anvil, but built like a dream. It reminds us that evolution is not merely about survival, it is about expression. Every species is a thought the earth once had, and Stethecanthus was one of her most curious thoughts, a creature that carried the shape of wonder upon its head. The ocean forgets, but the rocks remember, and in those rocks the anvil-headed shark still glides, forever mid-motion, forever luminous in the mind's eye. Somewhere, beneath the waves of imagination, it still swims, the small, strange herald of creativity in deep time. Its head shines faintly in the dark, its denticles glimmer like stars, and the sea, remembering its own reflection, hums softly around it. Stethecanthus, the anvil of the ocean's dream, proof that even in prehistory, beauty and mystery shared the same face. The Carboniferous world was a breathing paradise, a time when the earth itself seemed more alive than ever before. The year was somewhere around 340 million before the present, and the air was thick with oxygen, the highest levels our planet would ever know. Every spark of life burned brighter, every movement thrummed with energy. Forests of towering ferns, club mosses, and horsetails stretched for miles across the continents, their roots weaving into the first true soils. The rain smelled of resin and peat, and the rivers ran dark and warm through green-shadowed swamps. It was a world caught between two rhythms, one of growth, one of decay. Plants reached skyward by day and fell into blackwater bogs by night, their fallen trunks sinking to form the coal seams that would one day fire human civilization. Insects ruled the air, dragonflies with wingspans the width of a hawk, millipedes longer than a human, crickets that hummed through humid nights. The land pulsed with the sounds of newness, and from those vast forests, countless rivers carried nutrients into the sea. There, in the shallows, a revolution was unfolding, one that belonged not to bone, but to cartilage. The ocean of the Carboniferous was a strange mirror to the forests above. The same abundance, the same heat, the same pulse of life. Warm, shallow seas flooded much of the continents, covering lowlands and deltas. Coral reefs and sponge mounds rose like underwater cities. Crinoids waved from the seafloor like fields of lilies. Shoals of fish shimmered beneath the sunlight, scales reflecting gold and green. It was an age of expansion, and the cartilaginous fishes, the sharks, rays, and their kin, were among its greatest beneficiaries. After millions of years surviving on the edges of the Devonian world, the cartilaginous fish now flourished. The extinction that had ended the age of armored fish left the oceans open, rich and waiting. In the Carboniferous they rose not as curiosities, but as lords of motion. Their bodies, once delicate and unassuming, had become masterpieces of design, efficient, graceful, endlessly adaptable. The ocean, it seemed, had chosen cartilage as its new language. The advantages were clear. Cartilage was lighter than bone, flexible, resilient, and responsive. It allowed these fish to move with a kind of poetry that bony creatures could not match, to twist, pivot, and glide through currents like dancers in liquid air. Their skeletons, though soft, were strong enough to endure pressure, and their skins, covered with minute denticles, reduced drag to near perfection. Every flick of a fin, every beat of a tail, was an expression of evolutionary grace. The fossil beds of this era, from Bear Gulch in Montana to the limestones of Europe, tell stories of abundance. Sharks of every shape and size drifted through the seas, some built for speed, others for stealth, some small and agile, others long and serpentine. There were those that hunted in open water, silhouettes slicing through the light, and others that hugged the seabed, blending into sand and shadow. The diversity was staggering. In some places, cartilaginous fishes made up the majority of marine species, their presence woven into every ecological niche. The seas themselves were a mosaic of environments. Shallow coastal lagoons merged into deep continental shelves. Warm tropical waters shimmered over reefs, while cooler zones nurtured forests of algae and sponge. In each habitat, life thrived: corals and mollusks, crustaceans and cephalopods, trilobites still lingering on the edges of time. But at the top of the food chain, in every corner of the Carboniferous Ocean, were the sharks. They were not yet the sleek hunters we know today. Many bore strange forms, fins that sprouted spines, tails of odd proportions, and jaws lined with teeth shaped for every purpose. Some hunted with swift lunges, others lay still, waiting for prey to pass close enough to strike. Yet what united them was a shared elegance of movement. They were creatures of efficiency, of subtlety, of power hidden beneath silence. Imagine standing on the shore of a carboniferous sea. The air is heavy, the heat thick enough to taste. Ferns arch overhead, their leaves dripping with condensation. The water before you glows green with life. Beneath the surface, shadows move, not sluggish but fluid, endless. The sharks of that age were not monstrous, but mesmerizing. Their fins traced silver arcs through the sunlight, their bodies moving with the rhythm of the tide. Among the reefs, smaller species darted like flashes of bronze. Their bodies glimmered with patterns of light, their senses tuned to every ripple. These were the foragers, the insect catchers of the sea, feeding on swarms of tiny crustaceans and larval fish. They were quick, precise, built for balance. Above them, in deeper water, larger forms cruised, hunters with jaws that could open wide and snap shut with startling force. The Carboniferous oceans were also rich in oxygen, just as the land air was, and this abundance allowed for greater size, endurance, and complexity. The water shimmered with suspended life, plankton, algae, drifting eggs, the microscopic seeds of future generations. It was a living soup of potential, and the cartilaginous fishes were among its most efficient harvesters. Some filtered the water for small prey, others used electroreception, detecting the faintest electrical pulses of hidden victims. Evolution was becoming sophisticated, layering senses upon senses, weaving perception into survival. The coastline, too, was alive with transformation. Rivers carried sediments from the new forests, depositing them into deltas that spread like veins into the sea. These deltas formed brackish sanctuaries, nurseries where young sharks might have grown in safety, away from larger predators. The water there was murky but rich, the perfect cradle for the next generation of cartilage. Beneath the waves, the reefs echoed with activity. Crinoids stretched toward light, corals built new walls, and ammonites spiraled through the water like jeweled clocks. The sharks glided through it all, both predator and participant, keeping balance by their very presence. Their hunger prevented overgrowth, their death fed the seabed. In their motion, the entire ecosystem found rhythm. It was, in many ways, a golden age. Never before had the oceans been so lush, nor the skies so alive. The land and the sea were locked in a dialogue, plants feeding the water with nutrients, the water sending oxygen and moisture back to the land, and within that grand conversation, the cartilaginous fishes played a central role. They were the ocean's response to the forest's bloom, fluid, mobile, endlessly adaptive. In this paradise of motion, new experiments of form appeared almost every generation. Some sharks developed spines along their backs, defenses against larger hunters. Others evolved elongated snouts, sensory amplifiers for detecting prey in murky water. A few grew large, broad fins that let them hover like rays, half swimming, half flying through the currents. Even the texture of their skin changed, smoother in fast swimmers, rougher in bottom dwellers. The Carboniferous Sea was not static. It was a laboratory of evolution, constantly revising its blueprints. But for all its abundance, this paradise was fragile. The same forests that filled the air with oxygen also consumed carbon, cooling the earth over time. Climate patterns began to shift. Periodic ice ages brushed against the edges of the tropics, changing sea levels, altering coastlines. Yet the cartilaginous fish endured, their resilience born of flexibility. While armored creatures vanished, while reef systems collapsed and reformed, they adapted. They always had. At night, the Carboniferous Sea must have been a world of stars beneath stars. Bioluminescent plankton drifted in the dark, flashing like embers in the current. Small sharks glided through them, leaving trails of glowing vortices behind. Above, the sky burned with unfamiliar constellations, the air thick with the hum of giant insects. The earth, in that epoch, was both wild and serene, its beauty raw, its balance precarious. Everywhere there was motion, rivers swelling with rain, tides rising and falling, forests breathing, reefs building, sharks gliding. Life was a continuous tide of creation and collapse. To exist in that world was to be part of a great, unending rhythm, a song of light, water, and time. When we look into the fossils of that era, we see not just bones and impressions, but the echoes of that rhythm, the outlines of sharks pressed into limestone, the faint traces of fin rays, the patterns of ancient denticles, all preserved like music written in stone. The Bear Gulch fossils, so finely detailed, show even the soft tissues of these creatures, their muscles frozen mid-motion. Through them we can almost see the ocean breathing. It's humbling to think that so much of what defines the modern ocean, its predators, its patterns, its balance, began in that distant time. The sharks that glide today across coral reefs, that circle the open ocean with quiet authority, are the descendants of those carboniferous pioneers. Every movement they make is a memory, an inheritance from the age when cartilage ruled the sea. The Carboniferous was more than a chapter in Earth's history. It was a heartbeat, a slow, deep pulse that sent life surging outward, filling every niche with invention. The air grew sweet with oxygen, the seas thick with life, and the planet, for a brief shining moment, became a garden without rival. And in that garden, the cartilaginous fish were the gardeners of balance, the sculptors of flow. Their bodies traced the geometry of grace. Their motion was the language of the sea. Close your eyes, and you can almost feel it still. The humid breath of that ancient air, the weight of green light filtering through leaves, the whisper of waves over reefs. Somewhere beneath those waves, a shark glides, its body a perfect harmony of strength and softness. It moves without effort, as if the water were made for it, or perhaps as if it were made for the water. The Carboniferous is gone now, buried beneath layers of coal and stone, but its breath remains in every ocean current, in every creature that moves through the sea. The paradise of cartilage lives on, not as memory but as motion, eternal, fluid, and alive, in every shimmering fin that cuts through the dark water of the world. At first it was only a whisper, a change too subtle for the forests to notice, too slow for the oceans to fear. The Carboniferous world, that warm and breathing paradise of green and water, began to shift. The air, once thick with oxygen and moisture, cooled by a fraction. The rains grew less frequent. The tides changed their rhythm. The world, it seemed, was taking a breath inward. What had been lush and endless was about to learn the meaning of winter. For millions of years, Earth had been a garden. The equatorial regions were blanketed by vast swamps, tangled forests of tree ferns, towering lycopsids, and sprawling horsetails. Their roots drank the black water of stagnant bogs. Their trunks stretched skyward into the mist, shedding spores that drifted like golden dust. Every fallen tree became peat, every peat bed the foundation for the coal seams that would one day warm human hearths. It was a world defined by abundance, and the air itself shimmered with life. But abundance has a cost. The forests drew carbon dioxide greedily from the air, storing it in their tissues, locking it underground. The atmosphere, once rich with greenhouse gases, began to thin of its warmth. Global temperatures dropped, slowly, imperceptibly at first. The balance tilted. The paradise that had sustained so much growth now began to starve its own creation. It started at the poles. Glaciers, silent and silver, creeping across the ancient continents. Gondwana, the southern supercontinent, froze under the weight of ice. Vast sheets spread across what are now Africa, South America, and Australia, grinding stone to powder. The sea levels fell, exposing once shallow shelves, leaving coral reefs gasping in the sun. The warm currents that had circulated through the Carboniferous oceans faltered. Cold water flowed down from the poles, changing the chemistry of the seas, rearranging the map of life. The Earth entered what geologists call the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, but to the living world, it was simply the slow tightening of breath. The great swamp forests, deprived of moisture, began to wither. Where once there were green canopies stretching to the horizon, now stood open woodlands, patchy and dry. The air, once heavy with oxygen, began to lose its richness. The insects, once enormous, dragonflies the size of birds, millipedes longer than men, shrank. The world that had sung in chorus now fell into quiet. The oceans felt it too. The rivers that had fed them grew erratic, alternating between flood and drought. The flow of nutrients changed. The shallow seas, those warm, bright nurseries of the cartilaginous fishes, began to retreat as coastlines shifted. The great deltas that had once served as shark nurseries dried into mudflats, and entire ecosystems vanished between one epoch and the next. It was not a single event, not a sudden apocalypse, but a slow unraveling. Life, which had spread in every direction, now drew back, adapting or fading. The delicate balance of the Carboniferous, oxygen, warmth, water, had been disrupted by its own success. The forests that had created paradise had also sown its undoing, and yet, amid the decline, the cartilaginous fishes endured. They always had. For hundreds of millions of years, they had survived extinction after extinction, thriving not through dominance but through adaptability. The changing seas challenged them once again, and they responded with quiet resilience. Some species retreated to deeper, colder waters where the temperature shifts were less severe. Others adapted to the brackish estuaries that still remained, their bodies adjusting to the fluctuating salinity. But even they could not escape the transformation completely. The collapse of reef systems and shallow habitats meant the loss of their ancient hunting grounds. The coral gardens that had once provided both food and shelter grew sparse. The abundance of small fish and crustaceans dwindled. Predators, finding less to eat, grew fewer and smaller. Evolution itself seemed to slow, as if the planet had paused its dreaming. If you could have watched the Carboniferous world fade, it would have been like witnessing a sunset stretched across millions of years. The green light of the forests dimmed. The great clouds that once carried endless rain grew thin. Rivers ran narrower, slower, sometimes vanishing entirely. The once humid air turned cool and crisp. The song of insects softened, and the nights grew longer. The earth was turning away from its lush youth, entering a quieter, sterner age. The continents continued to move, drawing closer together. Pangaea was forming, one vast, sprawling landmass ringed by deepening seas. This slow collision altered winds and tides, redirecting currents that had once stabilized the climate. Inland regions became arid. The monsoon cycles that had fed the swamp forests broke apart, replaced by drought and seasonal floods. Where there had been paradise, there was now uncertainty. For the cartilaginous fish, the challenge was profound. The shallows that had nurtured them were vanishing. Many species had evolved to thrive in warm, sunlit water, feeding among reefs and deltas. As the seas withdrew, they had to follow the warmth, or adapt to the cold. Those that succeeded gave rise to new forms, some sleeker, some smaller, their bodies refined by scarcity. Those that could not adjust disappeared quietly into the fossil record, their absence marked only by the void they left behind. Even as the world cooled, the deep ocean remained a refuge. Down where sunlight could no longer reach, life continued in steady rhythm. There the sharks and their kin persisted, unchanged, unhurried, following the same ancient currents that had guided their ancestors. They had learned long ago that survival was not about domination but endurance. They waited while the surface world transformed above them. The end of the Carboniferous was a time of contrasts. On land, life retreated into pockets of moisture, clinging to rivers and marshes. The forests that survived were smaller, less diverse, but stubbornly alive. Amphibians, which had once flourished in the swampy abundance, now faced drying habitats and competition from early reptiles, creatures that could wander farther from water. The age of amphibians waned, and the first great march of reptiles began. In the sea, the story was equally complex. Some lineages of sharks adapted to deeper waters, developing forms suited to new ways of life. Others, confined to shrinking coastal zones, vanished as the currents cooled. Yet through it all, cartilage endured. The skeleton of flexibility remained the ocean's quiet secret, a design too elegant to disappear. The decline of the Carboniferous did not come with explosions or sudden ruin, but with stillness. The oxygen-rich atmosphere that had once made fire nearly unstoppable began to fade. The air grew thinner, drier, more temperate. Fires burned less often. The endless rainstorms became rare. The earth was cooling, not into death, but into maturity. The fever of youth had passed. Geologists can see the change written in stone. Layers of coal abruptly capped by sandstone and shale, the sediment of rivers that no longer flooded the same forests. Fossil leaves shrink in size, spores become less frequent. The record tells of a planet closing one chapter, beginning another. The age of green excess was over. Yet, there was a strange beauty in the transformation. The fading forests gave way to open plains where reptiles would one day thrive. The cooling seas birthed new species that could handle the changing chemistry. Even the glaciers, silent architects of change, carved valleys that would one day fill with new life. The earth, in its vast patience, was reshaping itself again. If one could have stood on the shores of that cooling world, watching the tide roll in beneath a grey sky, the feeling would have been bittersweet. The once luminous swamps had become subdued, but there was still movement, still sound, the slow creak of trees bending in the wind, the distant splash of fish in the water, the whisper of the tide against stone. Life was not ending, it was adapting, retreating, waiting for the next opportunity. For the cartilaginous fishes, that patience would prove prophetic. They had survived countless upheavals before, and they would survive this one too. Long after the forests had turned to coal and the glaciers had retreated, they would still glide through the oceans, their bodies unchanged, their design eternal. The cooling of the Carboniferous was not their end, merely another test of endurance. It is strange, perhaps, to call an extinction beautiful, but there is something graceful in the way the Earth resets itself. The planet's rhythms are vast beyond comprehension, cycles of carbon and heat, of ice and bloom. Each collapse is also a beginning, each silence a breath before new music. The world that followed the Carboniferous, the Permian, would bring new challenges greater still. Yet without the cooling, without the collapse of the swamps, the stage would never have been set for what came next. So the paradise dimmed, slowly, softly. The dragonflies no longer blotted out the sky. The air grew clearer. The sea withdrew a little more, each century. And beneath those quieter waves, the sharks and rays swam on, patient, ancient, untroubled by the whims of weather. They had seen empires of coral rise and fall, forests bloom and burn. They knew the sea would return, as it always did. And when the ice finally began to fade, and warmth crept once more across the continents, they were still there, shadows of endurance, gliding through the new light of a changed world. The Carboniferous did not truly end in destruction, it ended in transformation. A cooling breath after a feverish dream, a pause in the endless dance of creation. The earth, wiser now, turned its face toward a new chapter, and the oceans, though quieter, still shimmered with motion. If you listen closely to the whisper of the tide today, you can almost hear that ancient rhythm still. The long exhale of a world cooling, the memory of forests collapsing into coal, the sound of sharks gliding through waters that were once the cradle of their kind. The paradise was gone, yes, but in its fading light, the seeds of endurance had already been sown. It began quietly, as endings often do. There was no single explosion, no instant catastrophe, but a slow and gathering unease that crept through the bones of the Earth itself. The Permian world, 252 million years ago, was vast and powerful, a planet of supercontinents and deep seas, of deserts that stretched unbroken for 1,000 miles, of mountains that pierced the clouds. Life had never been richer. Coral reefs covered the shallow seas, forests clothed the coasts, and the oceans were ruled by the elegant descendants of the Carboniferous age, the sharks and their kin, the masters of cartilage. For nearly 50 million years, they had thrived in stability. The Earth seemed eternal, but even the longest peace hides a pulse of change. Beneath the surface, the planet stirred, restless, immense and unseen. Far to the north, in what is now Siberia, the crust began to tear. From the fissures rose fountains of fire. Lava poured across the land, not in brief eruptions but in floods that lasted thousands of years. Whole provinces were buried under molten rock, entire landscapes drowned in flame, the air filled with ash and smoke, thick with carbon dioxide and sulfur. What had begun as fire soon became suffocation. These eruptions, the Siberian traps, released more gas than any volcanoes before or since. Carbon dioxide flooded the atmosphere, trapping heat. Sulfur dioxide followed, mixing with moisture to form acid, rain that fell in endless storms. The skies darkened, sunlight dimmed, forests withered beneath toxic clouds, rivers ran black with minerals and ash. The earth was beginning to choke on its own breath. For a while life endured. It always does. The seas still shimmered with motion. Sharks still glided through the depths. Ammonites still spiraled in their shells. Trilobites still crawled along the seabed. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the chemistry of the ocean began to change. The carbon dioxide from the air dissolved into the water, forming carbonic acid. The pH dropped. Shells that had taken millions of years to perfect began to dissolve. Reefs, the great palaces of the sea, crumbled into dust. The warmth spread. Temperatures rose beyond anything the planet had known in 500 million years. The shallow seas turned stagnant. Oxygen drained away, replaced by poison, hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia. Bacteria that had once been confined to the deep flourished in the heat and darkness, releasing toxins that turned the water into a lethal soup. The surface shimmered still, but beneath it, the ocean was dying. Imagine standing on the shore of that world. The air is thick and heavy, the horizon blurred by haze. The sun burns dim and red, filtered through clouds of sulfur. The sea before you is motionless, its surface glassy and strange, tinted with the faint green of algal bloom. You might see a fish break the surface, gasping, then nothing. Beneath the silence is total. This was not merely an extinction, it was a collapse of the planet's systems. On land, the forests that had taken millions of years to grow vanished almost overnight. The great conifers and seed ferns turned to ash. Insects, once the triumphant masters of the Carboniferous skies, vanished by the thousands of species. Amphibians, reptiles, and early synapsids, the ancestors of mammals, fell in waves. In the oceans, the devastation was even more complete. Nearly 95% of marine species disappeared. The trilobites, which had survived for over 270 million years, were gone forever. The great coral reefs of the Permian, built by sponges and algae and time, dissolved into memory. Ammonites and brachiopods dwindled to fragments of their former diversity. Even the cartilaginous fish, those tireless survivors who had endured every previous extinction, were struck. Many vanished, their delicate bodies leaving only rare traces in the sediment. The seas that had once been rich with motion grew still. Scientists call it the Great Dying. No other phrase quite captures the scale of loss. More than 4 out of every 5 species on Earth disappeared. It was as if the planet had emptied its lungs and forgotten how to breathe. But what caused it? Truly, the volcanoes were the trigger, yes, but the deeper story was chemical, cosmic, and intertwined. The eruption of the Siberian traps released not only carbon dioxide but also methane from melting permafrost and seafloor clathrates. The greenhouse effect accelerated. The oceans warmed, releasing even more methane. The cycle fed upon itself faster and faster, until the Earth's temperature soared by 5, then 10, then 15 degrees. The oceans turned from blue to green to black. Anoxia, the total loss of oxygen, spread from the depths to the surface. Life suffocated from within. Bacteria bloomed in the absence of oxygen, producing hydrogen sulfide, a gas deadly to almost everything else. It rose from the oceans, bleaching the skies, poisoning the coasts. Acid rain fell even in the farthest forests, burning leaves, leaching nutrients from soil. The chain of life that bound ocean to air, plankton to fish, plant to predator, all of it unraveled. The cartilaginous fish, masters of adaptation, tried to endure. Their light bodies and flexible metabolisms had carried them through countless ages, but even they were tested beyond measure. Some species retreated into deeper water, others to cooler latitudes, but as the oceans grew toxic, refuge vanished. The seas were no longer seas, they were cauldrons. The currents stalled, the food webs collapsed, and the hunters starved alongside their prey. For perhaps the first time in Earth's history, the ocean itself became the enemy. And yet, even in the midst of catastrophe, a few survived. A handful of small species, sharks and rays, their descendants unknown, persisted in isolated pockets, where oxygen still touched the sea. They were the quiet inheritors of the Earth's resilience, carrying the secret of cartilage through the darkness of extinction. Their survival would seed the oceans of the future, the Triassic seas that would rise from ruin. On land, the silence deepened. The air grew thin, the soil barren. For millions of years after the Great Dying, the Earth's landscapes were nearly lifeless. Deserts spread across the interior of Pangaea, red and endless. The rivers ran shallow, the winds carried dust where forests once grew. The horizon was empty, broken only by the occasional silhouette of a lone survivor, a reptile creeping across the sand, a fern unfurling beside a stream. The chorus of life had become a single note. The planet itself seemed to grieve. The rock record shows it, black shales and thin grey bands marking the boundary, a scar of death etched across the crust. In those layers the fossils grow sparse, then vanish. Above them, a new world begins, stripped bare. The Permian was over. It is difficult even now to imagine such desolation. To stand in a world where 95% of everything alive has vanished. To breathe air that carries no birdsong. To look into a sea that hides no coral. To walk a land that remembers forests only as ghosts. And yet, the earth endured. Slowly, painfully, it began to heal. It took millions of years. The climate stabilized. The volcanoes quieted. Rain returned. Small plants began to spread across the scarred land, mosses and ferns reclaiming the edges of rivers. In the oceans, plankton bloomed once more, coloring the water blue. The survivors, those few who had endured in the darkest depths or the most remote refuges, began to evolve, to experiment anew. From the wreckage of the Permian came the ancestors of all that would follow, the early reptiles that would become dinosaurs, the first modern corals, the small, resilient sharks that would reclaim their place in the sea. Every extinction, however final it seems, is also a reset, a clearing of the board, a chance for new patterns to emerge. The Great Dying was the most brutal of all, but it also paved the way for renewal. The Triassic world that followed was alien, yes, but it was alive again. The Earth, even when pushed to the edge of death, found a way back to song. Still, the memory of the Permian lingers. It is written in stone in chemistry, in the genetic echoes of the survivors. It reminds us that life is both fragile and relentless, that abundance can tip into catastrophe, and that the planet we walk upon is capable of change beyond human comprehension. When scientists study those dark rocks, they sometimes find minute fossils, spores, plankton shells, the faint imprint of a fish fin. Each one is a message, a whisper from a time when the world nearly ended. Each one says, "We lived, we endured, we began again." To imagine the last days of the Permian Ocean is to imagine a kind of beauty wrapped in tragedy. The sun burning weakly through a haze of sulfur, setting over a blackened sea. The silence beneath the waves, broken only by the drift of a dying creature's fin. The water warm as breath, yet empty of life. And then, somewhere in the darkness, a flicker, a movement, small and uncertain, one fish, one survivor, gliding through the ruin, carrying within it the blueprint for tomorrow. The Earth has died many times, and yet it lives. The Great Permian extinction was the deepest wound in its history, but it was also proof of endurance, the slow, stubborn persistence of life. The oceans would rise again, blue and full, forests would return, and with them the voices of insects, birds, and beasts. The spiral of time would turn once more. In the end, what remains is not the fire or the ash, but the resilience. Life, like the planet itself, does not forget how to breathe. And so, even after the Great Dying, when 95% of all that lived had vanished, the Earth turned toward the light again. The oceans shimmered once more. The survivors moved through them, silent as memory. The age of cartilage was not over. It was waiting, sleeping beneath the silence for the next dawn. The world had burned, suffocated, and drowned, but in the deepest depths, life whispered the oldest truth it knew: I endure. When the Great Dying finally released its grip, the earth was silent. The air carried no birdsong, for there were no birds. The seas shimmered faintly in the weak sunlight, but their depths were empty. For nearly 10 million years after the Permian extinction, the world drifted in quiet recovery, wrapped in the long mourning of its own creation. Yet even silence holds potential. The winds still moved, the rain still fell, and deep beneath the dark, slow currents, life began again, soft, hesitant, but determined. The Triassic dawn was unlike anything before. The supercontinent Pangaea stretched across most of the planet, surrounded by a single vast ocean, Panthalassa. The interior lands were dry, endless deserts of red rock and shifting sand. Along the coasts, new rivers trickled from mountains, carrying minerals into the sea. The air was thin but warming, the skies clear once more after centuries of volcanic smoke. The earth was breathing again, tentative and slow. In that fragile calm, the survivors of the old world began to move. From the edges of extinction, the cartilaginous fishes, those quiet inheritors of the deep, emerged once more. They had endured the burning, the acid seas, the poison rain. They had outlasted death itself, and now they began to change. The oceans they returned to were not the same. The chemistry had shifted, the food webs broken, the reefs gone, the shallow seas of the Carboniferous and Permian were reduced to barren plains of silt and rubble. But the survivors, the small, the patient, the adaptable, found opportunity in the emptiness. For where there is vacancy, life rushes in. At first, the oceans were quiet mosaics of new beginnings. Simple organisms, plankton, algae, and early corals, recolonized the shallows. Small shellfish crept across the sediment, rebuilding the base of the food chain. Then came the hunters, cautious at first, testing the new world. Among them were the cartilaginous fish, leaner and more refined than their ancestors, their designs sharpened by catastrophe. Fossils from early Triassic layers show their diversity returning. Some species were small, delicate creatures shaped for shallow waters, their bodies flattened, their fins wide and flexible. Others grew long and slender, like living ribbons, gliding through mid-water currents. And others, even in this time of recovery, began to reclaim the deep, their dark eyes adapting once more to the pressure and cold. The sharks of the Triassic were not yet the giants of later ages, but they carried the seeds of that future in their bones, or rather in their cartilage. Evolution, like a cautious artist, began to refine what had already worked. The light, flexible skeleton remained, as did the smooth, denticled skin that let them slip through water with silent grace. But their jaws grew stronger, their teeth more specialized. The spiral-toothed designs of Helicoprion and the strange anvils of Stethocyanthus were gone, swept away by extinction. What replaced them were forms of efficiency: blades for cutting, cones for piercing, crushing plates for grinding. The sea was beginning to reinvent its predators. By the Middle Triassic, reefs began to return, small at first, patchy constructions of corals, sponges, and mollusks that took hold where sunlight touched the seafloor. Around these new islands of life, the cartilaginous fish gathered. They circled the corals, gliding with the ease of memory. The ancient instincts of ambush and pursuit, honed across eons, awoke once more. Prey was scarce but plentiful enough for the quick and clever. The world above was also transforming. The first dinosaurs were beginning to stir on land, still small and fragile, overshadowed by reptilian giants of other kinds. Amphibians lingered in swamps and rivers, relics of wetter times. Ferns and conifers crept back across the continents, turning the red deserts into patches of green. Rain returned to the coasts, feeding the deltas, and in those estuaries between salt and fresh, young sharks may have found refuge, just as they would millions of years later in every age that followed. The Triassic oceans became theatres of experimentation once more. Nature, with her infinite patience, began to sculpt new shapes. Some sharks developed long, torpedo-like bodies and crescent tails, built for speed in open water. Others evolved flat, winged forms that hovered close to the seafloor, early precursors of the modern rays and skates. Each adaptation was a poem written in cartilage, a gesture of survival transformed into elegance. Their senses, too, grew keener. Electroception, the ability to feel the faint electrical fields of living things, refined itself into an art. Even in the murky, nutrient-rich waters of the Triassic seas, these hunters could detect the heartbeat of prey hidden beneath sand. Their eyes, tuned to shifting light, adapted to every depth, smell, touch, vibration, all woven together into a seamless awareness of the world. Evolution had not just restored them, it had perfected them. And yet, they were not alone. The Triassic Ocean, though still recovering, was filling again with competitors. Bony fishes, descendants of the few survivors from the Permian, diversified rapidly. They developed stronger skeletons, swifter tails, more complex jaws. The age of cartilage was no longer unchallenged. The cartilaginous fishes would have to share the sea with these new rivals and adapt to coexist with them. But competition is the forge of innovation. In the Triassic, that rivalry birthed refinement. The sharks became more streamlined. Their internal structures evolved to conserve energy, allowing them to travel long distances in search of food. Some developed specialized teeth that could slice through scales, others teeth built to crush shells and bones. The oceans of the Triassic may have been sparse, but they were full of invention. The fossils from this period, scattered across what were once the coasts of ancient Pangaea, tell the story in fragments. The impressions of fins, the ghostly outlines of tails, the teeth preserved in fine-grained limestone, all remnants of a renaissance, written in silt and time. When paleontologists lift those stones today, they are holding the first sketches of the modern shark, small, elegant, efficient, alive with potential. Imagine the scene beneath the surface. The sunlight filtering through clear blue water, refracted into shimmering bands that dance across the sand. A small shark glides past, its body flickering silver in the light. Its movement is effortless, each flick of the tail sending it forward in smooth rhythm. Nearby, tiny bony fishes dart between rocks. A nautiloid drifts past, its shell casting a spiral shadow. The reef hums softly with new life. Everything that died in the Permian has returned in new form, quieter, more measured, but no less wondrous. For the cartilaginous fishes, the Triassic was both recovery and reimagining. Their bodies were now tuned, not just for survival, but for mastery. The sharks learned to dominate both shallow and deep waters. Some prowled the coasts, using stealth and speed to ambush prey. Others roamed the open ocean, their senses guiding them through vast distances. A few lingered near the seafloor, patient and still, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was during this time that the ancestors of modern orders began to appear. The first true cartilaginous and lamniforms, the prototypes of reef sharks and great whites. Their lines are faint in the fossil record, but their presence is unmistakable. The shapes we know today, the sweeping tail, the pointed snout, the perfect symmetry of motion, all trace their origins to this era of rebirth. The Triassic world was far from stable. Volcanic tremors still shook the continents. The atmosphere wavered between heat and drought. Extinctions, smaller but persistent, continued to prune life's experiments. Yet through it all, the cartilaginous fishes persisted. They had learned the oldest lesson of all, that survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. When the world changes, they change with it. As the Triassic progressed, life regained its momentum. The reefs grew brighter, the oceans deeper, the skies more forgiving. New creatures emerged, ichthyosaurs and marine reptiles that shared the seas with sharks, each adapted to the same liquid stage. It was a dance of coexistence, of competition and grace. The earth, once silenced, now pulsed again with movement. And through all of it, the cartilaginous fishes glided like memory through the water. They had no bones to fossilize fully, no grand skeletons to tell their stories in museums, but their teeth, those perfect renewable instruments, remained, scattered across Triassic sediments. Their teeth shine even now, small, luminous, immortal. Each one is a fragment of continuity, a testament to endurance. To hold one in your hand is to touch the persistence of life itself, a weapon of survival from a world that had nearly perished. Smooth at the base, serrated at the edge, the tooth of a Triassic shark tells of oceans that rebuilt themselves from ruin, of predators that never forgot how to move, how to listen, how to live. By the end of the Triassic, the planet was alive once more. The first dinosaurs walked the land. The forests thickened green again after millions of years of dust. The seas sparkled with light and color. Coral reefs rose higher, teeming with fish. The sharks, older than almost everything else that swam beside them, moved through this new abundance as if they had always been there, as if they had been waiting for it. Their return was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a whisper made of water and motion. The same whisper that had begun in the Silurian, survived the Devonian, flourished in the Carboniferous, suffered the Permian, and now in the Triassic rose again. The earth had burned, cooled, and healed, and the sharks, those living ghosts of cartilage, had outlasted every flame and flood. Their silhouettes gliding through the Triassic seas were the first signs of true recovery, a promise that life could not only endure but reclaim its beauty. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the heartbeat of that ancient ocean, steady and calm, echoing across time. The world had nearly died, but the sea was breathing again, and with each breath, the cartilaginous fish moved forward, carrying the memory of all that had been lost, and the hope of everything yet to come. The Triassic was their rebirth, and through them the ocean remembered how to dream. The story that began in the green twilight of the Silurian and burned through the tempests of the Permian does not end in extinction. It continues still, written not in ancient stone, but in the living ocean. Every wave, every pulse of salt and light carries the echo of that unbroken lineage, from the first cartilaginous pioneers that slipped between the armored titans of the Devonian, through the long collapse of the Carboniferous paradise, through the silence of the great dying and the fragile rebirth of the Triassic. Life persisted, slim, flexible, and quiet. And from that persistence rose the two lines that still glide through our seas today, the sharks sleek and enduring, and the ratfish the delicate ghosts of deep time. They are cousins, though separated by form and fate. Both are born of cartilage, both move through the water like whispers, both carry in their bodies the architecture of endurance. Yet where the sharks became the ocean's visible rulers, the ratfish withdrew into shadow, content to haunt the depths and remain unseen. Together, they are the living memory of 400 million years, two shapes of persistence, two ways of surviving the turning of worlds. The ratfish, or chimera, is perhaps the more mysterious of the two. Few humans have ever seen one alive, for it dwells in the cold, dark places of the ocean, thousands of meters below the surface. There, light fades to grey, and sound becomes pressure. Its body, slender and supple, gleams faintly like polished metal. Its eyes shine with a ghostly blue light, reflections of the bioluminescence around it. Its fins move in slow, graceful undulations, not the slicing strokes of a shark, but the drifting rhythm of a creature that has no need to hurry. It is an ancient design, elegant, unchanged, for more than 300 million years. In its anatomy, the past is preserved. Unlike the sharks, the ratfish has a single gill opening on each side, covered by a thin flap like the gill cover of a bony fish, an echo of evolution's experimentation between cartilage and bone. Its upper jaw is fused to its skull, an old trait that most other fish abandoned long ago, and within its mouth are not rows of replaceable teeth, but broad, ever-growing plates, perfect for crushing shells and crustaceans. Its tail tapers into a whip-like filament, more for balance than speed. Its skin is smooth, not roughened with denticles like the sharks, soft to the touch yet resistant to the cold. It moves through the darkness with the ease of long habit, a creature perfectly suited to its chosen silence. Some species carry a venomous spine at the base of the dorsal fin, a small reminder that even quiet beings have defenses. If one could watch a ratfish glide through its world, it would seem like a dream from another time, a shimmer in slow motion, a living fossil drifting through the black. Around it, strange forms still wander, deep-sea worms, jellyfish, ghostly squid, but the ratfish moves differently, almost thoughtfully, sensing the electric fields of buried prey, feeling the vibration of the unseen. Its large eyes gather what little light there is, transforming darkness into information. It hunts not by sight, but by presence. And yet, for all its strangeness, there is familiarity too. The ratfish's ancestors once shared the shallow seas with early sharks. They were companions in evolution, exploring the same possibilities in different ways. While the shark lineage grew into swift hunters, rulers of coral reefs and open waters, the ratfish turned inward, smaller, slower, more refined, less driven by the chase. It found its place not in competition, but in patience. Perhaps that is why it endures still, untouched by the haste of evolution, the oldest living echo of the ancient seas. Sharks, by contrast, are evolution's masterpiece of motion. Their story is one of adaptation, of refinement without end. From the Triassic onward, they diversified into every corner of the ocean. Some became giants, cruising the open seas in endless migration. Others remained small and cryptic, blending into the sands of coastal shallows. Some learned to leap, to sense, to glow, to give birth, to live young instead of laying eggs. Over time, they became not relics of prehistory, but the pulse of the modern ocean itself. There are more than 500 species today, from the luminous lantern sharks that light the abyss to the enormous whale shark, gentle filter feeder of the sunlit tropics. They are scattered across the world, in coral reefs and Arctic bays, beneath Antarctic ice and along volcanic ridges. They move through saltwater and freshwater alike, through mangroves, lagoons, and trenches. There is no ocean without them. Every part of their design carries the signature of deep time. Their skeletons, still made of cartilage, are lighter than bone, allowing them to glide with near effortless grace. Their skin, covered in minute denticles, smooths the flow of water, reducing drag and noise. Their jaws, layered with multiple rows of teeth, are living factories of replacement, thousands of teeth over a lifetime, each new row pushing the old forward, as if time itself moves through their mouths. Their senses weave together into a map more complete than vision alone, smell that can detect a drop of blood in miles of water, hearing that can feel the drumming of distant waves, electroreception that can trace the heartbeat of prey hidden beneath sand. They are creatures built not only for survival, but for elegance. A shark in motion is the sea's own idea of perfection, a translation of current and gravity into muscle and instinct. Every turn of its body echoes 400 million years of refinement, of trial and endurance. It carries within it the silence of ancient oceans, the memory of the Carboniferous swamps, the resilience of the Permian abyss. And yet, for all their age, sharks remain curiously modern. They evolved early and then changed little. Not because they stopped, but because they arrived at something that worked. Nature, in her infinite experimentation, sometimes achieves a balance so complete that further change becomes unnecessary. The shark is one of those rare equilibria: predator, scavenger, explorer, wanderer. Some species, like the hammerhead, seem almost like sculptures of adaptation, their heads spread wide like wings, filled with sensory organs that map the world in electric texture. Others, like the great white, embody the raw geometry of power, a machine of muscle and motion. Yet others, like the bamboo sharks of tropical reefs, show the gentler side of the lineage, gliding lazily among corals, patterned like living mosaics. The modern ocean belongs to them as much as to anything else. They shape ecosystems simply by existing. A healthy reef needs its sharks. Their presence keeps the balance, culling the weak, guiding the flow of life. When they vanish, the sea falters. When they thrive, the world beneath the waves breathes more easily. And through it all, their distant cousin, the ratfish, continues its silent vigil in the deep. The two lineages, though diverged hundreds of millions of years ago, remain bound by a shared ancestry, by the lightness of cartilage, the ancient rhythm of electroreception, the patience of long evolution. Together, they are like two notes in a chord, one bright and sharp, the other low and lingering, forming the harmony of the ocean's memory. If the shark is the heartbeat of the modern sea, the ratfish is its whisper. Where sharks rule the visible world of reefs and open water, ratfish drift through the unseen, where sunlight never reaches. Their eyes, adapted for darkness, reflect faint glimmers like stars caught beneath the surface. Their mouths, built for crushing, feed quietly on shells and crustaceans, turning motion into sustenance with slow precision. To see one is to glimpse not only a living animal, but a fragment of time, an echo of the Paleozoic, swimming unnoticed through the present. Scientists often call them living fossils, but the term feels too cold for such continuity. They are not fossils, they are persistence embodied. They remind us that survival is not always about conquest or transformation. Sometimes it is about balance, about finding a rhythm with the world and staying true to it, no matter how the continents drift or the temperatures shift. If one were to trace a single thread through the whole history of life in the sea, from the first jawed fishes to the modern reef, it would be this: the story of cartilage, flexible and enduring, the material that refused to vanish. Bone rose and dominated, but cartilage endured, humble and strong. It shaped the ocean's greatest hunters and its quietest ghosts. It flowed through extinction and rebirth alike, carrying the memory of the first fin through every current of time. The ratfish and the shark are the twin inheritors of that story. One thrives in the light, the other in darkness. One is celebrated, feared, and watched. The other is hidden, almost forgotten. Yet both remind us that evolution is not a straight road toward complexity or dominance, but a branching path of persistence. What survives is not always what changes most, but what adapts best to change itself. To watch a shark move through water today is to see the past alive. Its eyes, cold and golden, have seen more than any species alive. Its fins cut through the same element that cradled its ancestors before the continents had names. Its body, shaped by deep time, glides with a confidence that belongs to eternity. And to imagine a ratfish drifting below, unseen in the abyss, is to remember that evolution does not forget its earliest music. Both are the same melody, played in different keys. The ocean that birthed them has changed 1,000 times. Continents have come together and torn apart. Ice ages have swept the poles. Asteroids have darkened the skies. Yet through all of it, these creatures remained. The shark's sleek form, the ratfish's ghostly glide, they are signatures of survival written in water. When we look into their eyes, we are looking into history itself. Not the human kind, but the planetary kind, written in tides and motion. The shark and the ratfish do not remember in thought, but in shape. Every muscle, every fin, every flicker of light along their bodies is a memory of worlds lost and remade. The human world, brief and bright, has barely brushed against their time. To them, we are a moment, a spark above the surface. Yet we share their ocean, and through that shared water, we touch the same current of life. The ratfish gliding through the abyss, the shark circling the coral reef, they are not relics of what was, they are the living continuity of what is. So the story that began in the shallow green seas of the Silurian does not end in fossils or extinction. It continues here, in the quiet glide of a shark through the reef, in the slow pulse of a ratfish beneath the polar dark. The Earth has changed and will change again, but their design remains, timeless, resilient, graceful. When the last human light fades, the ocean will still shimmer with their movement. The shark will still slice through the blue, the ratfish will still drift beneath the cold pressure of the deep, and the sea will remember everything. For they are the breath of evolution made flesh, the dream of cartilage, still alive after 400 million years, the legacy of endurance. The ocean's oldest prayer, still moving through the tides. When we look back across the immense sweep of life's history, through oceans that glowed green with ancient plankton and continents that cracked and drifted like slow clouds, a pattern emerges, not of triumph, but of resilience. The story of life on Earth is not one of steady progress or inevitable improvement, but of endless adjustment, of flexibility meeting change. Evolution, in its deepest truth, is not a ladder upward, but a river winding through shifting landscapes, finding new paths whenever old ones dry. Every creature that has ever lived is a chapter in that river's story, each a temporary arrangement of possibility, each a shape made to fit the world as it was, not as it would become. The trilobites of the ancient seas were once the masters of their realm, their armored bodies perfect for a world that no longer exists. The giant amphibians of the Carboniferous ruled in humidity and abundance, but when the air dried and forests fell, they vanished. The mighty reptiles of the Permian gave way to mammals, the forests of the Eocene bowed to grasslands, and still life flowed onward, not because it was strong, but because it could bend. Flexibility, that is evolution's quiet secret. The ability to adapt, to reimagine, to survive the breaking of worlds. Sharks learned it early. When the seas changed, when oxygen thinned or predators multiplied, they altered form, refined their senses, shifted their homes. Some grew large, others small. Some became swift, others patient. In every age of chaos, a few lines found a way through, not by clinging to what was, but by yielding to what came. That is the wisdom written in cartilage and scale. Survival is not conquest, but conversation. The great dying of the Permian nearly silenced that conversation. It wiped the slate clean of almost everything. But in its aftermath, those who endured, the small, the adaptable, the unassuming, became the ancestors of all to come. The world that followed was not shaped by power, but by pliancy. It was the flexible, not the fierce, who inherited the sea, and so it has been ever since. The lesson runs deeper than biology. The Earth itself is an organism of change. Its crust breathes through tectonic motion. Its climate drifts through cycles of heat and ice. Its chemistry shifts in rhythms of oxygen and carbon. Stability, that fragile illusion we cherish, has never been the planet's way. What appears constant to us, the blue of the ocean, the curve of a continent, the whisper of wind, are temporary harmonies in a long, improvising song. And life's secret has always been to listen well enough to stay in tune. Flexibility, in this sense, is more than physical adaptation. It is ecological, behavioral, even emotional in creatures capable of awareness. It is the art of being in relationship with change, rather than in defiance of it. A coral reef responds to warming seas by bleaching, a desperate shedding of pigment that sometimes allows recovery, sometimes not. A desert plant opens its flowers only after rain. A migrating bird shifts its route when winds alter their course. The shark senses salinity and temperature through its skin and adjusts its depth. The ratfish, deep in the cold, slows its heartbeat to match the stillness of its world. Life, at every level, listens and answers. In human terms, we might call that intelligence, though it is older than thought. Evolution is the slow intelligence of survival, written into matter itself. DNA is its language, a text constantly revised by experience, failure, and chance. Each mutation, each subtle shift in form or habit, is an experiment. Most fail, a few succeed, and those few shape the future. There is no foresight in it, no grand design, but there is something almost like wisdom, the accumulated memory of what works, embedded in every living thing. When we speak of flexibility, we often imagine weakness, bending, yielding, giving way. Yet in nature, it is strength. A tree that does not bend breaks in the storm. A species that cannot shift when its food changes starves. The most enduring structures in biology are those that can change their function. Fins become wings, gills become lungs, scales become feathers. What begins as a necessity becomes an advantage, and what was once adaptation becomes beauty. That too is the poetry of evolution. Survival and grace are often the same act seen from different times. The ratfish, survivor of ancient seas, learned that poetry well, it did not compete for dominance. It retreated into the quiet, while others rose and fell in the bright shallows. It slipped into darkness and waited. Its world became the deep, cold, slow, stable. There, change was slower and time more forgiving. It found a form that worked and kept it. For hundreds of millions of years, while continents shifted and climates swung from tropical to frozen, the ratfish remained, not unchanging, but untroubled. It is not that it escaped evolution, rather it mastered it. It learned when to move and when to be still. The sharks, on the other hand, met change head-on. They became the most versatile of predators, inhabiting every oceanic niche from coral reefs to abyssal plains. They diversified not because they could control their world, but because they could fit themselves to it. Each fin, each sense, each behavior was a conversation with the environment, an answer to temperature, salinity, prey, and depth. Some grew serrated teeth to tear through flesh, others flattened theirs to crush shell. Some hunted alone, guided by silence. Others swam in groups, their movements synchronized like tides. Their evolution was not a single story, but 1,000 local improvisations, each a variation on the theme of survival. And from that endless experimentation, a pattern emerges: flexibility is the only permanence. The more life changes, the more it learns how to change. It is not progress toward perfection, but a deepening capacity for response. The ratfish's stillness, the shark's motion, the coral's fragility, the insect's metamorphosis, all are expressions of the same principle: to endure, life must remain in motion, even when still. That lesson extends beyond biology, into the human story, for we too are products of evolution, creatures of adaptation born from a lineage that survived by listening to the world. Our hands, capable of building, once grasped branches. Our eyes, tuned to color, once scanned forests. Our minds, restless and curious, evolved not for philosophy, but for survival, to notice patterns, to learn, to adapt. Yet, somewhere along the way, we forgot that adaptability is not just our origin, it is our destiny. In our quest for stability, we built cities, systems, and certainties. We learned to bend nature to our needs, rather than bend ourselves to its rhythm. For a while it seemed to work, but the planet, older and wiser, continues to move. The climate warms, the seas rise, the forests shift. The same adaptability that shaped sharks and ratfish will now be asked of us, not in the form of gills or fins, but in imagination and humility. Flexibility for humans must be conscious. It must mean changing how we live, not only where, learning again to listen. As the ratfish listens to the deep, as the shark feels the pulse of the tide, it means understanding that our technologies, our economies, our comforts, all are temporary forms, successful only while the world supports them. If the environment changes, we must change with it. That is not surrender, it is participation in the oldest pattern of life. Evolution's lesson is patient but firm. Rigidity invites extinction. It is true in coral reefs and in civilizations alike. The Permian world collapsed not because life was weak, but because it was cornered. The lineages that survived were those already accustomed to discomfort, those that could find opportunity in crisis. For humanity, the same rule applies. Our survival will not depend on dominance, but on adaptability, on our ability to imagine new ways of belonging to the planet that raised us. If we learn from the sharks, we learn to move lightly, efficiently, wasting nothing. If we learn from the ratfish, we learn to endure quietly, without greed. Together they remind us that strength and gentleness are not opposites but partners, two halves of resilience. The ocean, their home, is both vast and intimate, capable of violence and peace in the same breath. It teaches that balance, not power, sustains life. The Earth has seen 5 mass extinctions and countless lesser upheavals. Each time, life has responded with invention, new forms, new systems, new relationships. Flexibility is evolution's memory, written in every feather, every fin, every seed that germinates after fire. It is not a strategy, but a philosophy. Adapt not because you can, but because you must, and because change is the nature of being alive. One day, long after we are gone, new creatures will inherit this world. They will not look like us, or think like us, but they will carry the same principle within them, the instinct to bend toward survival, to listen, to evolve. the ocean will still breathe. Somewhere, a descendant of a shark will glide through the currents, sensing the electric rhythm of life. Somewhere deeper, a chimaera will drift through the dark, its eyes reflecting the dim light of a distant world, and the lesson of evolution will continue, whispered in every current. Life is not about perfection, but persistence. To be flexible is to remain in conversation with time. To be alive is to move with the changing music of the earth. Evolution does not promise permanence, but it offers something better: participation. We are part of that story, as fluid and uncertain as the tides. And so, as the night deepens and the ocean's surface calms, imagine the slow pulse of life continuing beneath. Imagine every living thing, from the smallest plankton to the drifting ratfish, as part of one great breath, exhaling change, inhaling possibility. That is the legacy of evolution, the understanding that to live is to adapt and to adapt is to endure. Flexibility is not weakness. It is the quiet strength that carries life through fire, ice, and silence. It is the rhythm of the earth itself, and the promise that whatever comes, the story will go on. Listen closely now, as the tide ebbs and the long song of the earth settles into quiet. The waves still move, but softly, like the breath of something vast that has been dreaming for a very long time. What you hear is not only the sea as it is now, but the memory of seas that came before, oceans that stretched across worlds we no longer know, under skies of copper and green. This is the lullaby of the ancient sea, the sound of everything that has ever lived, folded together in motion and salt. If you trace that sound backward through time, it becomes the whisper of the first currents that ever flowed. Before continents had faces, before fish had fins, before even the moon had settled into its steady orbit, the sea was already singing. Its voice was made of chemistry and chance, the dance of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and light. Within that formless tide, life began to listen. It took shape from chaos, fragile and trembling, a film of molecules clinging to warmth, and from that shimmer, everything grew. The forests and the wings, the coral and the bone, the laughter of mammals, the silence of stone, all of it began with that single pulse, the ocean's first breath. Every age since has been an echo of that beginning. Life rising, falling, adapting, oceans drying and returning, mountains rising and eroding back to sand. The earth is not a stage on which life plays. It is a partner in the music, improvising its part with fire and water. In this grand duet, the sea has always carried the melody. Even when the land grew wild with forests and animals, it was the ocean that remained constant, deep, mysterious, eternal. It remembers everything. It remembers the armored fish of the Devonian, the gentle sway of coral forests that flourished before any bird had flown. It remembers the Carboniferous, when rivers ran black with peat and the air was heavy with breath. It remembers the silence that followed the Permian fire, when the reefs turned to dust and even the wind seemed to hesitate. And it remembers the rebirth, the small bright shapes of new life flickering in the Triassic light, the sharks and ratfish gliding through waters that were once ash. The ocean has always been both cradle and witness. In its depths, every extinction has been mourned, and every rebirth celebrated in colour and motion. The sharks that swim today, their fins slicing through blue water, carry that memory in their bodies. Each one is a survivor of 5 great dyings, a living thread unbroken for over 400 million years. When they move, they are not only hunting or wandering, they are remembering. Their cartilage holds the shape of adaptation itself, the elegant proof that flexibility is stronger than stone. And somewhere deeper, in the twilight zone where light fades to darkness, the ratfish still drifts. It has no need for haste or hunger. It is a ghost of time, gliding through pressure and stillness. Its eyes reflect a soft blue glow, as if the stars themselves had sunk into the sea. It does not chase or flee. It endures. Every movement it makes is a whisper to the past. I am still here. If the earth could speak in words, perhaps it would sound like them. Calm, patient, endless. For what the ocean teaches, what evolution inscribes upon its waves, is not ambition or victory, but endurance. The sea does not hurry, it does not cling, it simply moves, and in that movement, everything finds its place. Life began there, because water knows how to hold without imprisoning, how to shape without forcing. It is the perfect metaphor for existence itself. We humans, brief as sparks in comparison, live upon the edge of that memory. We build our cities near the shore, listening unconsciously to the same rhythm that once lulled trilobites and ammonites. We find comfort in the hush of waves, in the scent of salt, in the infinite horizon, because some part of us remembers. Our blood carries the chemistry of the ancient ocean. Our cells still hum with ions of sodium and chloride, relics of the first tides. The sea is not our home in history, it is our home in composition. Perhaps that is why the ocean's song soothes us. When the day fades and the mind grows still, the sound of water brings something deeper than calm, a recognition. It is the oldest lullaby, the one we have carried inside us since the first heartbeat. Long before we sang to our children, the ocean sang to the earth, and still it sings. In that song lies the final lesson of the story we have followed. Everything changes and everything endures through change. The fish that learned to bend their bodies like ribbons survived the storms. The species that listened to the sea's shifting moods found new forms when old ones failed. Even extinction, that harsh teacher, gave rise to creativity. Every collapse opened space for new life, new songs, new dances of adaptation. The beauty of Earth's history is not its stability, but its capacity to heal through transformation. When we call the sharks and ratfish living fossils, we do not mean they are trapped in time. They are the proof that time itself can be gentle, that survival is not about being unchanging, but about being true to the flow of the world. They have lived through fire, ice, and darkness, not because they resisted the earth, but because they moved with it. In them, evolution's wisdom becomes a visible truth to endure. One must be as fluid as the sea. As you listen to this, perhaps in the quiet of your room, or beneath the slow turning of stars, imagine the world not as it is, but as it was, and as it will be. The continents will drift again. The poles will melt and freeze in endless rhythm. The species we know will fade, and new ones will rise. But the ocean will remain, carrying forward the memory of all things. Somewhere, a descendant of today's shark will still swim. Somewhere, in the black calm of the abyss, a ratfish will still drift. The lullaby will go on. The sea's voice is made of patience. It tells us that we are temporary but not meaningless, fragile but part of something enduring. Every grain of sand, every shell, every drop of water once belonged to countless worlds before this one. When a wave breaks on the shore, it is not just water meeting land, it is time itself folding back into the present. It is the touch of the Carboniferous swamps, the whisper of Permian winds, the shimmer of Triassic sunlight, all returning for a moment to greet us. The ancient sea does not ask us to remember facts or fossils. It asks us to remember wonder, the quiet astonishment that life exists at all, that we are here to witness it, that something as soft as a heartbeat can endure through epochs of fire and ice. To stand by the sea is to feel that wonder directly, to know without words that the same waves have touched every age of the world. And in that knowing, there is peace, because if the ocean could carry life through such ruin and renewal, it will carry us too, not as individuals, but as part of the same great continuity. The earth will change, we will change with it, but the current that began 4 billion years ago still flows through us, unchanged and unbroken. Imagine then the ocean at night, moonlight trembling across its surface, the tide breathing against the shore. Far below, a ratfish drifts among soft corals. Far above, a shark glides through the cool darkness near the surface. Between them stretches the same water that once covered the world, filled with memory and motion. The sea hums softly, like a voice half asleep, remembering every life that ever touched it. This is the Earth's lullaby, sung in a language older than words, the rhythm of adaptation, the melody of endurance, the harmony of renewal. It is the song that held the first cells and the last stars reflected in water. So close your eyes and let the sea speak. It tells you that you are part of this story, a momentary ripple in an eternal tide. It tells you that every breath you take is borrowed from the same air that once brushed the fins of ancient fish. It tells you that to live is to flow, and to flow is to last. The ocean never ends. It only changes shape. Its song is the same in every era, only sung by new voices. Trilobites once, sharks later, whales now, and someday something else entirely. But the lullaby remains. And so, as the waves rise and fall beyond time, the ancient sea sings once more, a gentle, endless promise. Everything passes, but nothing is lost. The water remembers, the earth endures. Sleep, for you are part of it all.